And then I thought it was right here-ish. Maybe we'll see it.
Okay, we'll see. Here it comes.
No, that's not this part. But you can tell, like, it literally went everywhere. On the freeways, residential streets, it was by the port. It got kind of mess. And then here's at the end where the guy ditched the car, turns into a neighborhood, presuming that this is the guy's house. He gets out. As a matter of fact, I was telling everybody, because I replayed this chase earlier, that we were going to tell everyone how it ended.
Put it in park, buddy.
Right, right?
Car in park.
Yeah, yeah. Fortunately, that didn't hit that other residential building there.
Somebody put posts up.
Yeah. So for those who are super familiar with this area, this is Gaffrey and First Streets. Turns out that police set up a perimeter around the house before the man who appeared to be the suspect exited the home in house slippers.
Oh boy.
With his hands up to surrender.
Okay.
So that's what happened there.
Well, that's kind of a casual way to do it, that's for sure. We just didn't want it to end in any kind of a violent manner. He did do the right thing eventually and give up, but boy, he wasted a lot of police resources this morning. Now, originally it had kicked out as a report of a stolen car, which so many of these police chases turn out to be something along those lines. So I'm sure we'll hear more of the follow-up on it because they did do a really good job with it there. It was mostly handled almost all exclusively by Long Beach Police.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, Ron, when you hear coronavirus, do you think mortgages? The housing market?
I do not.
All right, one more top story to go here. Turns out that there is a financial side effect of the coronavirus amid the economic concerns.
Yes.
This one is driving some changes in the mortgage industry. Okay. Mortgage applications have taken a rise in the past week as borrowers are reacting to lower mortgage rates.
Oh, interesting.
Now, the lower rates are being driven down by investors having increasing concerns about the economic impact of China's coronavirus outbreak.
Yep.
The 30-year fixed-rate mortgage decreased 3.81%. That's the decrease too.
Wow.
That's really low, Ron.
Yeah, no kidding.
When I bought my house, it was like 4.125.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So I'm hearing we might be getting some breaking news here really quickly.
Phoenix Police, Mesa Police, Tempe, Chandler, Homeland Security, and the State Attorney General's Office. Operation Silent Predator, an undercover operation targeting the demand for child sex crimes and human trafficking.
Yeah.
From what we're hearing, they utilize some undercover detectives. The suspects solicited or brokered deals for sex acts with individuals they thought to be between the ages of 14 or younger. Now, this is a major development, Pilar, because 26 people have been arrested.
All right, we're going to listen in. Ron, thanks for joining us. I would like to let everybody know we're going to have Kellyanne Conway in just moments talking about impeachment.
Field to try to engage in these acts, and they are very often very willing, and we are very easily able to catch them. So one of the things that's most important in law enforcement is to be continuously gathering information. For us, information is power. We share information with our regional partners, particularly in the East Valley. We share information with other venues around the city. So the more that we know about these people in advance, the more we're able to tailor our investigation to get the best investigative result.
And I guess, to follow up on that, you have your undercover operation ongoing. Are they contacted unsolicited by some of these people, or can you walk me through how that works?
Essentially, it's like fishing. When you put the bait out, the fish will come.
Are there any other questions? Okay, some of our guests have some appointments they need to be to, so we're going to dismiss them at this time. And just so that you know, I have a fact sheet for you. I'm going to email it out to you. If a couple of you are from radio or whatever and need a copy of it here, I can give you that. But I'll email you what we have with the information.
All right, everybody. Seems like we got the tail end there of that news conference. But what I'm going to do for you, I just told you that Kellyanne Conway, she held a news conference this morning talking about opioids at the White House. But of course, you know that reporters wanted to talk about impeachment. They had impeachment questions, right? So let's listen in right now on Fox News Now before we go on a break.
Kellyanne, one other question. Your former co-worker, John Kelly, said he believes John Bolton. What do you make of John Kelly's statements what do you make of John Kelly's statement saying that he believes John Bolton?
Well, I respect General Kelly enormously. and like him personally. I don't know what he's referring to, so I can't answer it. In other words, that's just I believe John Bolton. I've not seen.
John Bolton
Well, I've not seen a manuscript, and I will tell you that
President Trump directly tied the aid to Ukraine.
He didn't say
to
that.
Investigations. That's what John Bolton said. He said that he believes that.
Did John Bolton say that?
Yes,
Or are
he
we
said that
talking
he
about an
believes-
unpublished manuscript? I'm sorry, where did John Bolton say that?
John Bolton said he believes.
Where?
John Kelly says he believes John Bolton. Are you now
Yamiche,
saying that?
where
he's
did John Bolton
confused?
say that?
He said that in front of a number of people. It's pretty clear.
No. Where did
it's pretty
Ambassador
clear that
John Bolton say that?
Kelly is saying that if John Bolton
No.
said that
Back up.
President Trump
Yamiche,
directly
where
took
did
the aid-
Ambassador John Bolton
It was
say
in
that
front
this
of-
week?
It was in front of cameras. Everybody saw it. Are you
John
now
Bolton or
saying
John
that-
Kelly?
John Kelly said that in front of
Yamiche,
cameras.
where did Ambassador John Bolton say
So are you
this
saying
week?
that John Kelly did not understand what he was saying when he said, "I believe
No,
John
I'm not
Bolton"?
saying that, but you're not answering my question. I can't answer your question unless I understand it.
But it's a very clear question.
It's not clear at all
It is a
because
very
I'm
clear
asking
John
you.
Bolton said in his book that.
Is that
he
what you're
had a
talking about? An unpublished
conversation-
manuscript? Are you talking about a leak of an unpublished manuscript as reported by the New York
John Kelly was
Times?
talking about that manuscript.
No, I'm asking you
I'm
what
talking
he's
about that,
referring
and John
to.
Kelly was talking about that as well.
Okay, because I don't know that to be true, and neither do you. In other words, I don't know what John Kelly was referring to, and I'm asking you, what exactly did Ambassador John Bolton say this week in advance of General Kelly's comments? What did he say? I didn't see him say anything. I hear about unpublished manuscripts that I frankly haven't seen, and I bet you haven't either.
Well, what do you make
So
of
you
John
want me
Kelly
to
making that statement then?
answer a hypothetical wrapped up with a
Yes.
conundrum?
Well, yes. Why don't you just answer? What do you make of John Kelly commenting that if the manuscript is true, that he believes John Bolton?
If the manuscript is true,
Yeah.
you want
what
me
do you
to?
make of John Kelly making that statement?
You want me to answer
No, it's
hypotheticals
not
wrapped up in
hypothetical.
it? It
John
is
Kelly
hypothetical.
commented and said, "I believe John Bolton." What do you make of John Kelly saying those words?
I don't make anything of it. I don't make anything of it.
You don't make anything of it.
No, but I will tell you, particularly by NBC and MSNBC, you guys couldn't stop
I work
day
for
after
PBS News
I know where you work. Day after day, you appear there plenty, and I think you're paid by them. But day after day after day, day after day after day, you know what you talked about with John Kelly? That he was on his way out. He was going to be the next one to be fired. He was on his way out. He started doing that. There's first a Politico article in October of 2017, about 6 weeks after he took the job. That person has moved on to a different outlet now, but it was still a ridiculous article. So for a year and a half while he was on the job, the main story about General Kelly was that he was going to be on his way out. Now, you want me to answer a question. I haven't talked to General Kelly about this or Ambassador Bolton about this. And I'm not going to comment, particularly from the podium in the press briefing room, on a leaked, unpublished manuscript that I haven't seen. I hope it doesn't include classified information. And I know there's always this rush to imbue credibility on whomever you think is against the president at that moment. If it's not Michael Cohen, it's Michael Avenatti. If it's not them, it's Lev Parnas, who couldn't even get into the Senate chamber yesterday because he's wearing a tracking device because he's been charged with crimes. So that's not a hypothetical.
But my question was about
You're asking
what do you
me
make
to
of John
answer-
Kelly's comments?
Well, I already told you what I think of General Kelly.
You don't make
I
anything
respect
of
him and
that.
I like him. And you're asking me to comment on, he said, I believe John Bolton. I don't know what he is referring to when he says that, and neither do you.
Kellyanne, on the President's State of the Union address next week,
Can I follow up on
President.
that question about, just this question now. What's the White House responded to Mr. Bolton's attorney's urgent request that you at least review the chapter on Ukraine
Has nothing to
so
do
that
with
he
me.
can use it if he is called as soon as next week to give evidence?
I'll tell you what the President of the United States is doing. In addition to eliminating from the face of the earth dangerous terrorists, completing 2 trade deals, continuing to reshape the federal judiciary. We're close to 200 judges, and we'll get there soon enough. Keeping this unbelievable economy going, and that's why his approval rating is at its highest point ever in his presidency, according to some polls, including by your outlets, if not reported by your outlets. He is helping to bring the overdose death rate down and to improve the life expectancy. He's focused on those types of things. He will go to Michigan today and I believe an auto manufacturing plant, and then to Des Moines, Iowa. That's what he's doing. The idea that we should stop what we're doing to review somebody's book strikes me as not a big priority, in my view, for the president. And so
Could be a key witness in the trial if witnesses are called next week.
you would hope so, wouldn't you? But anyway, again, if hypotheticals, I'm not answering them for you. Here's what I know to be real. 68,000 Americans died last year of a drug overdose. That's why we're here. And I'm always happy to answer all of your questions, as you full well know. But I gotta stick to reality and not hypotheticals. And frankly, wishful thinking.
Kellyanne, your question on that, please.
prevent witnesses. Are you confident you have the votes, Kellyanne?
Admiral, can I ask you a question on a different health topic? The Pentagon announced this week that the number of victims...
As you just heard, everybody, Kellyanne Conway was speaking about opioids there at the White House and had to answer some impeachment questions. We will hear from the State Department on Iran when we return right here on Fox News Now.
Mild to very serious, it really depends, and I just don't know what the DoD injuries are. I've not seen those.
Last question.
You spent the weekend getting even, oh. We spent the late nights making things right between us. But now it's all good, babe. Roll that backward, babe, and pay me close. 'Cause girls like you run around with guys like me till sundown. When I come through, I need a girl like you, yeah, yeah. Girls like you love running at me too. I want when I come through, I need a girl like you, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I need a girl like you, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I need a girl like you. I spent last night on the last flight to you. We took a whole day up, trying to get way up, ooh. We spent the daylight trying to make things right between us. And now it's all good.
Jared over at Guns and Gadgets, because he is my source for up-to-the-minute Second Amendment news. If you don't know about Jared, if you don't know about Guns and Gadgets, go to his channel, subscribe, hit the bell notification icon, and let him know High Impact Vlog sent you. Instituting a prohibition on stargazing unless you pay him $35 like I went over in that video last night. Now you have to submit to a state-run mental evaluation on your dime. That's right. Think of and before I get any further into this, guys, think of the irony of this. People who literally belong in an asylum because they believe they have a higher claim over your life and property than you, to the point where they're going to initiate unjust force and violence on peaceful people who haven't done anything wrong. Those people who belong in a straitjacket, on a funny farm, in a padded cell, are telling you you need to submit to them and go take a mental evaluation, a psychological evaluation, so that they can determine whether you can have a firearm or not. No, nothing to see here. There's no trampling of the Second Amendment. There's no infringing on your rights. What a bunch of BS. I can't even express to you the depth of the depravity of these people who think they can literally keep you and I from a personal protection device. Can you? I can't think of anything more insane, more ironic, nor more ridiculous. It's utter nonsense. So they have this bill where not only do you have to submit to a state-run psychological evaluation on your dime, you've got to do it every time, they say, every time you want to get any kind of firearm. So for every firearm purchase, you need to submit again to the state's authority. And this comes from, a stream can rise no higher than its source, guys. If you have a psychopath as governor, like Governor Cuomo is, who, by the way, is a relative of Chris Cuomo from the Communist News Network, or the Counterfeit News Network, as I like to call him. You have a Governor Cuomo, stream can rise no higher than its source. In other words, the followers, the pansy followers of Cuomo will never get any better than their leader. Ever. This is Cuomo, who basically says, if you don't want to submit to my laws, then you can leave the state. How about this, Cuomo? How about you leave the state of New York and make it a better place? Guys, I don't even know what to tell you. It's just completely psychotic. And this is the kind of crap that people like Governor Cuomo want to institute on everybody. Remember, government, the meaning of government, if you just take the etymological breakdown of government, comes from two Latin words, governo and mentis. Governo means to control or to govern, and mentis means the mind. It means to control the mind or mind control. They literally want to control you. They want you to submit to their rules before they can give you permission to have a firearm, something that you have a human right to possess. And nobody has the right to step in the way of your rights to acquire, on any level, a personal protection device. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell notification icon, give them a thumbs up, share them with everybody you know, and don't forget to subscribe to my private email list through my website, highimpactflix.com. I'll see you guys in the next heavily censored shadow ban video.
The Witcher world is back.
Trump of committing in their Russia collusion. In what President Trump calls the greatest witch hunt in American history, Democrat House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and House Intel Committee Chairman Adam Schiff weave a complicated and partisan tale, a tale whose singular ending is to impeach President Trump whether he has committed any wrongdoing or not. In the special edition of One American News Investigates, we break it down. We hold our own hearing where you, the American people, are jury. You decide. Watch as President Trump's personal attorney and veteran prosecutor Rudy Giuliani, together with One American News, calls up top Ukrainian diplomats and officials as witnesses to testify, under oath, their side of the story. The side that not only destroys Adam Schiff's case for impeachment, but uncovers what may be one of the greatest cover-ups of our time. In Kafka's nightmarish novel, The Trial, the protagonist is accused of a mysterious crime, endures faceless judgment, and navigates a maze of factless persecution within a system of bureaucrats and civil servants hell-bent on charging him of a crime.
Why am I always in the wrong without even knowing what for or what it's all about?
That's not something I'm prepared to discuss with you, Mr. K.
Fast forward to the year 2019, and we see Kafka's 1915 novel playing out in the Democrats' impeachment spectacle of President Trump, what some call a crime in search of the evidence.
Impeach 45!
We must open an impeachment inquiry.
We begin impeachment proceedings now.
And we've got to impeach him and get rid of him.
My sole focus right now is to make sure that he's not the president next term. My sole focus.
We're going to go in there, we're going to impeach the motherfucker.
we're going to launch an Article 3 impeachment.
3 years into Trump's presidency, Democrats finally got their wish. On Halloween, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi gave her impeachment blessing, and votes were cast for a House-led inquiry into President Trump. But as the inquiry commenced, it seemed Democrats dealt more tricks than treats, launching headlong into closed-door hearings, second, third, and fourth-hand information, questionable witnesses, drawn-out public hearings. Hundreds of hours and thousands of testimony pages later, Democrats are no closer to making the case for impeachment than they were the day Trump was inaugurated. Worse for Intel Committee Chairman Adam Schiff, confirmation Trump acted illegally has been squashed time and again by his own witnesses.
I don't recall President Trump ever talking to me about any security assistance.
And like the Kafka novel, the accusers themselves seem confused about the exact nature of the crime, shifting accusations from quid pro quo to bribery to smear campaigning and back to quid pro quo. At the heart of this latest round of quid pro quo accusations, one name surfaced over and again: President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. Democrats and their witnesses claim Giuliani was a central figure in a nefarious plot to dig up dirt on Joe Biden and his son Hunter in order to help President Trump for 2020.
It was very apparent to me that that was what Rudy Giuliani intended, yes.
Mr. Giuliani.
Rudy Giuliani.
Most Americans are getting exhausted as they try to keep track of Schiff's drawn-out, one-sided inquisition, one in which Republicans are given little say. White House attorneys are banned from participating, and Schiff outright refused Republicans the right to call any witnesses of their own. Fortunately, Schiff can't stop One American News from bringing in some of these witnesses and asking the very questions he refuses to let America hear. We first sat down with the man of the hour for his side of the story. Rudy Giuliani, personal attorney to the president and veteran prosecutor, America's mayor, and recently the subject of a lot of finger pointing from an impeachment inquiry led by Adam Schiff.
It's almost impossible to tell you how many lies have been told by Adam Schiff and by the Democrats. They have become, to me, a totally corrupt organization. There's no basis for most of what they're saying. They even changed the meaning of language, bribery. Oh, it's quid pro quo. No quid pro quo, it's bribery. Hey, jerks, it means the same thing. Bribery, quid pro quo. You can't have bribery without a quid pro quo. It reminds me of Alice in Wonderland and Humpty Dumpty, You make the words mean what you want.
For the layman who is watching bits and pieces of this entire proceeding, we get the impression that you, Rudy Giuliani, the personal attorney to the president, was sent over. You fly over in the cloak of night into Ukraine. You drop yourself down there and you start moving things and facts and people around.
Would it surprise you that I haven't been in Ukraine for 2 years? That during the course of this entire thing, I never went to the Ukraine, either in the daytime or in the middle of the night.
2 years. You have not been to Ukraine for 2 years.
Last time I remembered exactly. Last time I was in Ukraine was in December 2017. So let's get the facts straight. Haven't been to Ukraine for 2 years. Never went to the Ukraine for this mission of investigating for the president.
So what was Giuliani doing in Ukraine? Giuliani says this last trip to Ukraine was for a security mission for the city of Kharkiv, before he was even asked to be President Trump's personal attorney. He has a paper trail and witnesses to prove it. Still, the Venn diagram of Giuliani and Ukraine has become impossibly muddled in Schiff's impeachment proceedings.
I was sitting in my office late on an afternoon. It had just begun to get cold. It's like a novel, right? Just begun to get cold. I got a call from a friend of mine of 35 years. Former assistant U.S. attorney, former executive in the U.S. Attorney's Office, an excellent investigator of the highest repute. And he said to me, Rudy, you're not going to believe me, but you know the collusion they're talking about in Russia? I said, yeah, the one that didn't happen.
This was where I stopped Giuliani and clarified a key point. November of 2018
you know the collusion they're
found
talking about in
everyone
Russia?
watching the
I said,
Mueller
yeah,
investigation.
the one that didn't happen.
That expensive
This
and
was where
baseless
I stopped
accusation that the
Giuliani and
Trump
clarified a
campaign
key point.
colluded with a foreign
November
government
of
in order
You know
to
the
collect
collusion they're
funds.
talking about in
Everyone
Russia?
watching the
I said, yeah,
Mueller
the
Narrative
one that
right
didn't
now
happen.
is
That
that you
expensive
didn't
and
do
baseless
this
accusation
because
that
Biden was running for president.
Complete lie. I looked into Ukraine because it was thrown at me, put in my lap. I was told collusion, corruption, bribery, all affects 2016, all affects the way in which the Democrats did, in large measure, everything they were hypocritically accusing the Republicans of. How ironic. 40 million spent on the ridiculous Russian collusion, and all along, all the time, they were colluding, conspiring, bribing, making illegal campaign contributions from Ukraine to the United States.
Now, this is where Democrats and Adam Schiff declare conspiracy theory. But Giuliani says he has the proof. He says there are witnesses. He says he can prove that this is far from a conspiracy theory. It's a pattern of behavior by figures at the very top. When we return, we go back to that phone call he received on that wintry fall day in New York, ground zero of what could well be the uncovering of the most corrupt cover-up in American history. To debunk Adam Schiff's case for impeachment, two things need to be shown. One, that President Trump did not illegally withhold aid from Ukraine in exchange for dirt on Joe Biden. Two, Trump's actual conversation about looking into Biden corruption in Ukraine was based on evidence that Joe Biden actually committed a crime in his dealings with Ukraine. If Joe Biden is shown to have violated the law by abusing his power as vice president under Obama, years before Biden would announce presidential ambitions, then Adam Schiff's argument that Trump sent Giuliani after Biden because he was 2020 competition is completely unfounded, rendering Schiff's impeachment inquiry moot. The first point has already been debunked by transcripts, testimony, and witnesses. The second point is the weightier accusation. For that, we go back to that fateful conversation on Thanksgiving Eve 2017. We're back in Rudy Giuliani's office in New York, listening in to a phone call where a former U.S. attorney and investigator just told him he had information Democrats committed the same crime in Ukraine they were accusing Trump of committing in their Russia collusion investigation under Mueller.
I said, yeah, I know, I hear that all the time, but I've gotten 20 people that bring me. He said, Rudy, I got a source. You know the guy. You met him 5 years ago. Go check his background out. I can get him up here. Within 4 or 5 days, I met the source. The source told me the following in brief. He said, look, I don't know this as a matter of fact. This is all hearsay, like the garbage that Schiff has presented so far. Hearsay. He said, Joe Biden was involved in helping to produce bad information on Trump and on the Trump campaign, that he was involved in some of the hacking, that he was involved in funneling money to the Clinton campaign illegally from Ukrainians. And I said, how can you be involved in it? I said, that's ridiculous. And he said, and he was involved in bribing the president of Ukraine in order to get a lot of these cases killed. The case on his son, the case on George Soros, which was the company that was moving the dirty information. So a lot of that evidence has disappeared. And he got the very crooked oligarch who stole $5 billion. He kind of got him off the hook and back in the country. I said, no, Joe Biden didn't do that. I said, this is like crazy conspiracy theory. He took out his cell phone, and he showed me the January 2018 confession of Joe Biden, in which Joe Biden laid out in about 2.5 minutes a total definition and a total confession to the crime of bribery.
I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired.
Probably prosecuted 20 bribery cases. I know the elements cold. I remember judges charging juries. These are the elements of the crime of bribery. I don't think I'd ever seen as concise and as tight and as clear a confession. But worse than that, I saw a confession with proof of guilty knowledge by leaving his son out. We prove intent by lying, lies of omission, lies of commission, because we can't look in somebody's brain. So what we have is we got the clear crime of bribery. He offered a $1 billion loan guarantee in return to fire a prosecutor. Crime of bribery, that's it, over, already.
Enter the long and torrid history of corruption in Ukraine. This initial conversation, however, attached with a source, sparked Giuliani's interest. Still, months before Giuliani was to become Trump's personal attorney, already debunks most of the Democrats' claims that Giuliani was involved in Ukraine in order to collect dirt on the Bidens. Add to that the fact that Giuliani is not an unusual name to bring into any discussion about prosecuting foreign corruption.
Corruption is a hot-button word for Rudy Giuliani. That is what you have dealt with for years.
All my life. I have prosecuted Republicans and Democrats. I always felt there wasn't a difference in the two. Some are good, some are bad. I prosecuted the Teamsters. I prosecuted corrupt city organizations, kind of helped make me become mayor. I prosecuted successfully a lot of Mayor Koch's commissioners for violating the RICO statute. I prosecuted the 5 families of the mafia. I prosecuted terrorists. I prosecuted 2 Nazi war criminals. I prosecuted Boesky, Milken. I think I'd probably be accused of boasting, but if I said I probably had the strongest and deepest record of prosecutions of any U.S. attorney in 50 years, I wouldn't be exaggerating. But this is the work I do. I do it because I have a great, a lot of people will say this sounds, naive, or I have a great sense of doing justice, and I have a great sense of law. And frankly, when these facts fell into my lap, I was outraged at the level of corruption that is being ignored.
Giuliani adds, both the Democrat collusion scandal in Ukraine and the Joe Biden bribery case are ignored by a media drugged into a complacent and malicious leftist bias, which only breeds and emboldens criminals.
They get sloppier and sloppier and sloppier. And this comes from somebody who worked on police corruption when he was 24 years old, and I saw how not paying attention to police officers getting things at a low level ultimately led to police officers selling drugs. Not allowing the Clintons to do the minor stuff they did in Arkansas, selling the governor's office, and then the bedroom, and then the Clinton Foundation. We went from like grifters to major league criminals. Same question here with the Bidens.
By spring of 2018, Giuliani was appointed to represent President Trump as his personal attorney. Again, this is in the middle of the Mueller investigation. By this time, Giuliani has leads that seem to surround 2 major cover-ups. The first cover-up is one of collusion. Not Russian collusion, as Mueller failed to prove, but Ukrainian collusion. And collusion not between the Trump team and a foreign government, but collusion between the Democrat Party, the U.S. State Department, and the Ukrainian government using taxpayer aid. This DNC collusion cover-up is what got Giuliani investigating in Ukraine over 2 years ago. It had nothing to do with Schiff and his deep state cabal's claim that Giuliani was digging up dirt on Joe Biden, the presidential candidate. And it was in the process of looking into the DNC collusion case that Giuliani stumbled upon an equally outrageous second cover-up. The second cover-up was that of Joe Biden extorting the Ukrainian government using taxpayer dollars to protect his own son. To the DNC collusion with a foreign government, Democrats claim conspiracy theory. To the cover-up that Biden bribed a foreign government in order to protect his son, Biden and Democrats say conspiracy theory. But a conspiracy theory is based on conjecture. assumptions, coincidences, and strange connecting dots. A conspiracy theory becomes reality when backed up by actual evidence. One American News decided to verify that evidence by bringing in witnesses to back up Giuliani's claims. Witnesses who not only proved that there was Ukrainian corruption involving the Bidens and the DNC, but prove also that Democrats are accusing President Trump of committing the very crimes they are guilty of themselves. Don't go away. Next up, we break down and address Adam Schiff's impeachment inquiry as it relates to Giuliani and Trump. Then we meet the witnesses who crush Adam Schiff's impeachment circus.
Discover automatically matches all the cash back you earn at the end of your first year, dollar for dollar. Millions of people a year get their cash back matched. What are you waiting for? Unlimited cash back match, only from Discover.
I was confused with AT&T's different packages and which internet speed was right for our devices, but I found my way out thanks to Spectrum.
Break free and switch to Spectrum with super fast internet and TV with over 125 channels for $44.99 a month each. Click now.
In the previous segment, you heard from Giuliani himself, how he became involved in Ukraine to begin with. His answer completely annihilates deep state and Schiff accusations that Giuliani was digging around Ukraine for dirt on Joe Biden in preparation for 2020. The reality is, Giuliani was digging around Ukraine to investigate something he's prosecuted all his life: corruption. And corruption he found at a shocking scale. Let's start with what the Democrats have called, time and again, a debunked conspiracy theory: DNC collusion with Ukraine against candidate Trump. Over the course of several days, One American News sat with Rudy Giuliani to look over all the evidence he said he had on the DNC collusion case. The veteran prosecutor was proud to note he's never lost a case. Looking at his preparation and research, it was easy to see why. Giuliani's packed messenger was filled with meticulously filed notes and documents, first-hand accounts, names, dates, places, timelines, articles, government letters. The story was winding and complicated, but in following each alarming statement with the evidence, it was clear collusion between the DNC and Ukraine was far from a conspiracy theory. Giuliani summed it up in the following terms.
The Ukrainians illegally helped the DNC, and nobody bothered to follow it up. And for a year, they've been trying to get it to us, and they were blocked by the FBI, and they were blocked by the Justice Department.
Starting with the easy evidence, public information. In January 2017, Politico's Ken Vogel and David Stern broke a bombshell story that created far less falderall than it deserved. Ukrainian effort to sabotage Trump backfires, read the headline. The article goes on to break the story that a DNC operative named Alexandra Chalupa, a former Clinton White House employee turned DNC consultant, met and colluded with top Ukrainian officials in order to collect dirt on a political candidate, Donald J. Trump and his whole team. It bears repeating. This is ironically the exact crime Mueller blew millions of taxpayer dollars trying to accuse Trump of committing. But in this case, no investigations were opened into Democrats.
Alexander Chalupa, there's no question about it. Alexander Chalupa was hired by the DNC. She was paid money, and her job, as I think we can prove in a court of law, her job was to gather dirt on Trump, Manafort, Donald Trump Jr. Any dirt.
Chalupa found her avenue through top Trump aide Paul Manafort. Manafort had worked in Ukraine until 2013, dropping off Ukrainian radars since then. But this was enough for Chalupa. According to the Politico article and several witnesses who have come forward since, Chalupa was on a singular mission.
We have witnesses in Ukraine that will say that she gathered dirty information and, working with Antax, stored it. And we don't need witnesses because she made a big mistake. She sent a text, and this is at a very important time. It's several weeks before the phony, discredited Black Ledger came out. On May 3rd of 2016, Ali Chalupa, that's Alexandra Chalupa, wrote to Louis Miranda, who's the comms director for DNC at the time. She was a paid operative. She said, a lot more coming down the pipe. That refers to the Black Ledger. I spoke to a delegation of 68 investigative journalists from Ukraine last Wednesday. They put me on the program to speak specifically about Paul Manafort, and I invited Michael Isikoff, whom I've been working with for the past few weeks, and connected him to the Ukrainians. So that's an admission of exactly what they investigated Donald Trump for 2.5 years to the tune of $35 million. That is taking foreign information and inserting it into the American campaign, negative information in the American campaign from foreigners. If Donald Trump gets investigated for that, why doesn't Ali Chalupa get investigated for that?
He says Chalupa had a hand in manufacturing documents that claimed Manafort received $12.7 million from various members of the pro-Russian political party in Ukraine. They called it the Black Ledger. This story is widely reported to have been debunked. Yet Giuliani points to the WikiLeaks email to indicate otherwise.
This is just a smoking gun. But then it gets worse. More offline tomorrow. Since there is a big Trump component you and Lauren need to be aware of that will hit in next few weeks, and something I'm working on you should be aware of.
Senators Johnson and Grassley have joined forces to ask the FBI about Alexandra Chalupa and her role as an operative. Ultimately, if proven, the DNC, through operatives like Chalupa, worked with the Ukrainian government to collect dirt on Trump. They succeeded in interfering in the 2016 elections when Paul Manafort resigned from the Trump campaign shortly after the emergence of this mysterious Black Ledger on the doorsteps of various Ukrainian politicians. Almost immediately after the appearance of this Black Ledger, the ledger goes to the prosecutor, the embassy, and, coincidentally, in Chalupa's case, her friend at the New York Times, the very same man she mentions in her email to the DNC comms director. But wait, says Giuliani, there's more.
It ends up in the hands of a woman named Nellie Orr. I don't know if you remember that name. Nellie Orr worked for Fusion GPS. Nellie Orr transmitted the information to a husband and 2 people at the Justice Department. By the way, a clear violation of 18 United States Code, Section 208, which makes it a felony to get information and deal with your wife in that way. That charge has been out there for 1.5 years, and nobody's been prosecuted for it, which is why those of us who support the president feel a certain degree of frustration that people are not treated fairly. I feel a great deal of frustration that the Southern District of New York allows an article to be written that I'm being investigated for bribery, and Joe Biden hasn't been asked a question in a grand jury about what is a clear, absolute, 100% admission of a bribery. And the mere fact that he was vice president of the United States, and the mere fact that he's a Democrat, and the mere fact that he's 1 year away from possibly being a presidential candidate doesn't give you immunity to commit bribery. This is ridiculous.
Each part of this story is either documented or backed up by eyewitnesses who can testify under oath, says Giuliani. Indeed, as we look through the documents, certain names seem to appear and reappear. We made note of them and commenced tracking them down. Meanwhile, what happened to the Vogel and Stern Politico article? The story died on the vine, inspiring little more than yawns from Democrats who not only ignored the story, but went on to attack all messengers of the story as peddlers of debunked conspiracy theories, despite the fact that the Politico story was confirmed by the Ukrainian government itself. The new Prosecutor General's office started writing official inquiries, asking for the U.S. to look into suspicious findings uncovered, corroborating these reports.
Ukrainians illegally helped the DNC, and nobody bothered to follow it up. And for a year, they've been trying to get it to us, and they were blocked by the FBI, and they were blocked by the Justice Department.
And that's this letter from Prosecutor General's office in Ukraine.
Correct. That frustration in the Ukraine is unbelievable.
Giuliani says the letter of concern from the Ukrainian government was addressed to the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District in New York, Jeff Berman. A U.S. attorney in the Southern
Correct.
District
The frustration in
approached Giuliani
Ukraine
about it.
is unbelievable. He told me that he
Giuliani
was
says the letter
contacted
of concern from the
in
Ukrainian
October
government was addressed to the U.S. attorney in the Southern District in New York,
by
Jeff
Ukrainians.
Berman. A U.S.
And they
attorney
told
in
him
the Southern
that they were
District
having serious problems getting this information to the U.S. Contacted that there was vast interference by Ukrainians in our elections. And it was believed that Hillary Clinton, they were having illegal contributions going from several Ukrainians. They named them to Hillary Clinton, and that Joe Biden was helping with that. And that Joe Biden had a separate problem in that he bribed the president of Ukraine to fire the prosecutor. And the net result of firing that prosecutor is a whole bunch of cases went away.
They just disappeared. This appeared to be official confirmation that DNC collusion with Ukraine actively took place, and no one was doing anything about it. Meanwhile, President Trump asks the newly elected Ukrainian President Zelensky about DNC collusion and its association with Joe Biden. And Adam Schiff launches all-out impeachment war, accusing President Trump of being a mafia don for even daring to ask this question.
Do you realize how much we corrupted that country? How much our vice president corrupted that country to let that guy come back? Do you realize how it makes it impossible for our country to be respected in the Ukraine if we don't hold our public officials to account for doing something like that? And when the president of the United States is asking the president of the Ukraine to do this, it doesn't matter if little Joe Biden wants to be a candidate for president. Just because you want to be a candidate for president doesn't mean you can corrupt nations. It doesn't mean you can steal money. It doesn't mean your family can become rich off your public service and you claim not to know about it. Where the heck is that in our Constitution?
But Democrats ignore these facts, and the media goes right along.
Because we have a media that has no ability to even read the transcript, they just believe anything the Schiff says. I mean, nobody realizes that, for example, Zelensky is the one who brings up corruption in the conversation, not Trump, when he says, I have to drain the swamp here. That most of Trump's conversation about corruption is collusion. Out of 120 lines, only 5 are devoted to Biden. And Biden has to be investigated because he's inextricably connected to the investigations that went on, that were killed, that destroyed some of the evidence of collusion. Also, he was alleged to be involved in the collusion. That has to be looked at. So you can't take Biden out. And since when does somebody not get investigated for a substantial act of bribery at the highest level of government because they're thinking about running for president of the United States?
After all this, Adam Schiff and his Democrats still call the DNC collusion story a vast right-wing conspiracy.
Rudy Giuliani has made no secret of his desire to get Ukraine to open investigations into the Bidens, as well as a conspiracy theory of Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election.
Clearly, Schiff doesn't have all of his information. And in looking at letters from Ukraine, printed articles, WikiLeaks emails from the DNC, and DNC Collusion's Black Ledger, we needed to find witnesses who could corroborate this smoking gun, as Giuliani called it. Was the Black Ledger that took down Manafort in an attempt to derail Trump really manufactured by Democrat operatives? Who knew about it? Who paid for it? What happened to it? Where was our FBI in all of this? We found a surprising range of witnesses willing to testify under oath the answers to these questions. Don't go away. Next, we tracked down these witnesses and bring them to Washington. A feat in and of itself, considering the forces who don't want these witnesses to speak out. You're watching a One American News Investigates exclusive. We'll be right back. We just went over the core elements of the DNC Ukraine collusion scandal, a tale backed by a paper and email and witness trail of a Democrat Party operative working with Ukrainian officials to gather dirt on candidate Trump. Over the course of our investigation, One America tracked down Ukrainian diplomats, high-ranking former officials, and Ukrainione politicians, figures who could provide first-hand eyewitness accounts of whether or not this story of DNC collusion with Ukraine had any merit. Over the course of our investigation, One America tracked down Ukrainian diplomats, high-ranking former officials, and Ukrainian politicians, figures who could provide first-hand eyewitness accounts of whether or not this story of DNC collusion with Ukraine had any merit. Although what Mayor Giuliani had shown us to prove this was compelling enough, we needed more in order to prove DNC collusion. We needed eyewitnesses to connect Giuliani's dots. We tracked down and brought to the U.S. 3 key witnesses who could each testify from a different vantage point on DNC collusion in their home country. By default, they also knew a great deal about Joe Biden and his heavy-handed dealings in their country. But how does one determine who is a credible witness and a non-credible witness? Who better to ask than veteran of the courts, Rudy Giuliani? All right, Mayor, we're about to hear from a handful of witnesses that we have brought in to corroborate some statements that have been challenged in the media recently. But for the audience, for the benefit of the audience, briefly go over what Adam Schiff's impeachment inquiry is missing in terms of quality witnesses.
It's missing direct evidence. It's hard to actually remember if there's any. But I think people, if they remember the testimony, the nature of the testimony, will understand this. People testified not that I heard or that I saw. That makes you a direct witness. They testified, I heard from someone else who heard from someone else, or I surmise, or it's my opinion, or I guess.
On paper, Adam Schiff's parade of witnesses appeared to be a stellar lineup. Former ambassadors, Pentagon officials, former members of the NSC, lifelong bureaucrats and civil servants. But after hours of testimony, Giuliani says, Schiff's witnesses provided inadmissible evidence. Of the few exceptions, they exonerated the president completely.
Mr. Morrison, you were on that call, and there was no mention of withholding aid on the call, correct?
That is correct, Congresswoman.
And there was no quid pro quo, correct?
Correct.
What is admissible and inadmissible evidence?
So admissible evidence is direct testimony. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you smell? What did your senses tell you? If it comes from someone else, then that information can't be cross-examined. You may tell me that a bank robbery took place 2 days ago, and I testify that the bank robbery took place 2 days ago. And the defense lawyer gets up and says, did you see the bank robbery? No. Did you see the bank robbery? No. Did you hear anything about the bank robbery? Oh, yes, the person told me about it, but you weren't there. Objection, Your Honor. Witness dismissed, evidence stricken from the record. That's called hearsay evidence. Hearsay evidence is unreliable evidence. It's unreliable because the person doesn't have first-hand knowledge, and therefore it can't be tested.
If that's the technical definition of inadmissible evidence in a court of law, then Adam Schiff's impeachment inquiry should be cited in legal textbooks for future law students for years to come.
Ambassador, you weren't on the call, were you? You didn't listen on President Trump's call and President Zelensky's call?
I did not.
You've never talked with Chief of Staff Mulvaney?
I never did.
You never met the president?
That's correct.
You had 3 meetings again with Zelensky and it didn't come up.
And 2 of those they had never heard about as far as I know.
And President
there was no reason for it to
President
come up.
Zelensky never made an announcement. This is what I can't believe, and you're their star witness.
So I went through that record pretty carefully. Like Sondland was probably one of the worst. I talked to him 3 times on the phone, never about any of these things he testified about. I never met him. I don't really know him. And he's got this big construct that I made up this big plan. Well, if he had asked me, I would have told him, number 1, you're wrong. Number 2, let me show you how I didn't do it, because I was doing something else at the time. He got that from other people who were making their own surmises and their own guesses and have their own prejudices and their own biases, people who don't like Trump, people who disagree with foreign policy. Obama holdovers.
Adam Schiff called up one hearsay witness after another. Witnesses like Ambassador Yovanovitch, Ambassador Sondland, Alexander Vindman, Fiona Hill, among others. Through it all, 17 witnesses were deposed behind closed doors, while 12 testified in open hearings.
But here's the point. If this were a trial, if this were an indictment, the case would be dismissed on the first day. The defense lawyer would get up, he would test the evidence, he would ask for a hearing. They'd produce no direct witness. Motion to dismiss, the judge would more than likely grant the motion to dismiss, certainly at the end of the government's case. So now we have an impeachment that is proceeding on legally determined, unreliable evidence.
Adam Schiff declared his committee would draft a report and forward it to the Judiciary Committee. Back to another impeachment at all costs stooge, Jerry Nadler. There, Nadler would decide whether or not to proceed with formal articles of impeachment. Unsurprisingly, independent voters seem to have soured on the Democrat-led impeachment proceedings, according to data cited by The Hill in the days leading up to Thanksgiving. So the question becomes, if Democrats don't have admissible evidence, the American people are showing signs of impeachment fatigue, and an incredibly united Republican-held Senate all but guarantees House impeachment efforts are dead in the water once it leaves Pelosi's grip. Why are Adam Schiff and Democrats acting the pit bull on a shattering bone? So the only admissible evidence we have from the Schiff
Proves his innocence.
Right.
For a good reason.
So you wrote a letter to Lindsey
There's a
Graham.
good reason. He is innocent. He didn't do anything wrong. The president didn't do anything wrong in writing this letter. This is completely constructed by people who decided they were going to impeach him before he came into office, and they didn't give a darn what means they used, how many lies they had to tell. To them, it's more important to impeach him than to follow the rules of law. They don't care what damage they do to the presidency or our Constitution. They are, I think, possessed of this Trump derangement syndrome. The hatred of Trump outweighs any love they have for our country.
Another driving factor is possibly an even more sinister one driven by the need to cover up the wayward dealings of their own. Going beyond the DNC collusion, we return to the second key story that fell into Giuliani's lap as he was looking into DNC collusion. The story of Vice President Biden and his abuse of power in Ukraine to protect his own son and potential financial interests. This is where Ukrainian witnesses become imperative. For every instance Biden and Democrats cry conspiracy theory, there seems to be witnesses in Ukraine to contradict this. Yet, their side of the story gets no coverage. What gives? Giuliani says, unsurprisingly, there is a rotten cover-up taking place within our own State Department, intent on keeping the other side of this entire Ukraine story out of the headlines. In the middle of taping this special, Giuliani released a letter to Senator Lindsey Graham, urging him to resolve the mysterious State Department blockage that was keeping key Ukrainian witnesses from coming to the United States and testifying.
This is a pattern that's been going on for 2 years. Must have at least 5 or 6 or 7 Ukrainian witnesses who will say that over the course of the last 2 years, they've tried to come to the United States to give us evidence of vast collusion by the Ukrainians to affect Democrats in the 2016 election, and solid evidence of the corruption involved in Biden getting his son in order to protect the Burisma company and his efforts.
Their testimony on this matter would vindicate President Trump's conversation with President Zelensky and annihilate Schiff's entire impeachment game. One American News set out on the task to get all of these witnesses to the U.S., and true to Giuliani's claims, half of them had visa problems and could not enter the U.S. The other half were nervous about the status of their visas should they agree to come on air and testify. OAN wrote official letters requesting that their presence was imperative and in the interests of the United States of America. In preparing for their arrival, we were then required to understand every angle of the Biden's involvement in Ukraine. As we awaited our 3 Ukrainians in D.C., we sorted out the timeline. Don't go anywhere. Things are about to get very interesting. So if Democrats know they won't ultimately remove President Trump through their impeachment circus, what exactly are they doing? The answer circles around to Joe Biden. Democrats allege in breathless hysterics how President Trump was so worried about Joe Biden as a rival that he told Ukraine to dig up dirt on the poor and saintly Joe Biden. But the transcripts and witnesses completely contradict this narrative. With the White House releasing transcripts to demonstrate no wrongdoing, the Ukrainian government saying they had no idea there was any kind of preconditions to their getting this aid, and then testimony offered by Schiff's own witnesses proving no one heard anything to prove the president was doing anything other than his duty, the focus shifted once again. Democrats recalibrated their sights on Rudy Giuliani. Their creativity apparently at an all-time low, they accused Giuliani of the same thing they accused Trump of, a nefarious charge of quid pro quo. They accuse you, Mayor, of dealing out this under-the-table offer to Zelensky, saying, hey, I can get you to the White House, where we know for a fact that on April 21st, months before your conversation ever took place, the president already agreed to have a meeting with Zelensky. So how does that work?
I don't know. I had a lot of leverage, right?
They're saying that you're dangling a carrot that they already had.
If you investigate Biden, you get a meeting, you get a meeting, you get a meeting.
But he already had one.
Oh, screw you. We already have a meeting. It's ridiculous.
Then the Democrats accused Giuliani of running a smear campaign against their witnesses to collect this dirt against Biden. The American people were subjected to hours of this drama, only to come away exhausted, unilluminated, and with the murky impression that Giuliani played the role of a political hitman swapping right-wing conspiracy theories from the underbelly of Kiev. Somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, 3 Ukrainians were making their way to Washington, D.C. to flip this script. Democrats were putting up what appeared to be a giant smokescreen, going after Rudy, going after Trump, parading poor, victimized diplomats who had no idea what was going on, all this to distract from a far more tantalizing tale of extortion, bribery, and money laundering that took place in our Ukrainian witnesses' backyards, affecting their reputations, their lives, and their very livelihoods. To better prepare for their arrival, we needed to understand the Biden-Ukraine timeline. Here's what we found to be the undisputed facts about Joe Biden and his son Hunter's involvement in Ukraine. We go back to Obama's second term as president. February 2014, Obama appoints Joe Biden his Ukraine point man. By May, Joe Biden's son Hunter, with zero oil and gas experience and a cocaine problem, is appointed to the board of a Ukrainian oil and gas company called Burisma. He is paid anywhere between $50,000 a month to $160,000 a month to sit on this board. The father and son duo claim they never discussed Ukraine with each other.
Never discussed my business or their business, my sons or daughters. And I've never discussed them because they know where I have to do my job and that's it, and they have to make their own judgment.
Did you and your father ever discuss Ukraine?
No. As I said, the only time was after a news account. It wasn't a discussion in any way. There's no but to this. No, we never did.
Considering Biden was the Ukraine point man and Hunter was close to his father, that the two never spoke about Ukraine even once is relatively dubious. Just months after Hunter Biden is appointed to Burisma, the Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin opens an investigation into the oil and gas company. The persons of interest in his investigation are none other but Hunter Biden and his business partner, Devon Archer. By January of 2015, the founder of Burisma is named a fugitive of the state, fleeing the country a rich and despised man. Despite this scandal and a flood of corruption charges, Hunter Biden remains on the board of Burisma, collecting his monthly fee. A full year goes by, and the Ukrainian Prosecutor General Shokin now has several investigations opened on Burisma. Hunter Biden is in the thick of it all. State Department records show Hunter Biden met with Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken regarding Burisma. Several more mysterious trips to the State Department ensue.
He should be subpoenaed.
In the Obama State Department.
He should be subpoenaed. What did he talk about? If they talked about Burisma and there's no foreign agent registration form filed for it, that's what Manafort went to jail for. Now, I don't think that statute applies only to Republicans.
Entering the last year of Obama's presidency, Vice President Joe Biden tells then Ukrainian President Poroshenko he must dismiss the troublesome Shokin. Then in late March 2016, Vice President Joe Biden threatens Poroshenko with withholding the next $1 billion in loan guarantees unless he removes Shokin, the prosecutor general investigating Burisma. Without this $1 billion in U.S. taxpayer dollars, Ukraine would go into default. 7 days later, Ukrainian parliament fires Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin. 2 days after that, VP Biden arrives in Ukraine, awarding them with $1 billion in loan guarantees. 2 weeks later, Biden is on the phone with the Ukrainian president to discuss the appointment of a new prosecutor general. Yuri Lutsenko is named, a man with no legal background whatsoever, appointed to the country's highest legal position. Vice President Biden praises this choice. Within months, all cases against Burisma and Hunter Biden are closed. One of the witnesses who is actively being kept from coming to the U.S. is Viktor Shokin himself. Shokin has the ability to prove not only that Biden abused his power to protect his son Hunter, but that Joe Biden was covering up an even bigger crime for his son.
Shokin, as the prosecutor, was fired. There's this whole question, well, was he investigating Biden's son? He will testify that he was investigating Biden's son. He will show you the documents that prove he was investigating Biden's son. He will show you documents proving that Biden's son committed the crime of money laundering to the tune of $3 million. And he will testify to a number of incidents where President Poroshenko came into his office and told him to slow down on Burisma and Biden because Vice President Biden was objecting.
Giuliani goes on to cite how White House recordings trace numerous phone calls between Biden and Ukrainian President Poroshenko.
There were about 5 phone calls in the beginning of 2016 between the vice president and Poroshenko.
Which we'll save.
And three of them at the crucial moment where the pressure was being put on. Be very interesting to see the transcripts.
Giuliani proceeded to share with us a sworn affidavit from Shokin.
Poroshenko showing up in Shokin's office and saying, Biden's putting pressure on me. You can't go forward with Burisma. Can you slow it down? And all of a sudden, Shokin gets this communique from Latvia that shows a $16 million laundering transaction, classic laundering transaction. It goes from Ukraine to Latvia. It's disguised as a loan to another company.
Here emerges an official letter from the government of Latvia, alerting Ukraine of money laundering activity linked to Burisma and its board members, explicitly naming Hunter Biden. Giuliani breaks down how the money is moved across Europe, making its way back to Burisma.
Then it's dispersed as payment of board fees. Now, you don't make 2 loans to pay board fees unless you're laundering the money. $3 million gets to Hunter Biden that way. That is a straight-out violation of a money laundering statute.
Meanwhile, Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and their defenders adamantly declare Burisma was a legitimate operation.
The Ukrainians would not yield to, quote, investigate Biden because there's nothing to investigate about Biden or his son.
On top of defending their involvement, Joe Biden also insists that his firing of Prosecutor General Shokin was because Shokin was corrupt and inept, something we will be asking our Ukrainian witnesses shortly. Giuliani says this is a lie. Biden fired Shokin because Shokin was getting too close to uncovering Hunter Biden's money laundering activities.
If this were a legitimate operation, why are you doing it this way? Well, it wasn't a legitimate operation. It was the most crooked company in Ukraine. Everyone knew it. Joe Biden knew it. Joe Biden's son knew it. And unfortunately, to the disgrace of the United States, everybody in Ukraine knew what a corrupt arrangement the vice president had set up for his son, which makes everything Joe Biden said about corruption hypocritical, laughable, and damaging to the credibility of our nation, which is the reason this cannot be ignored.
When we come back, our Ukrainian witnesses make landfall. They arrive and we sit down with them to find out what they know before swearing them in for an on-camera testimony that proves to be very bad news for Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, and the Democrat Party. Foreign collusion, election interference, Biden corruption, money laundering, forged documents, abuse of taxpayer dollars. Adam Schiff has overlooked all of these legitimate crimes President Trump was duty-bound to investigate, deciding instead to accuse President Trump of the very crimes Democrats have themselves propagated for years, in what Giuliani calls a pattern of behavior shocking in size and scale.
They are fighting back because the Democratic corruption of the last 8 years under Obama will be, when revealed, of historic proportions.
And as Schiff's now infamous closed-door hearings were dragged into the open, it became even more clear. Schiff's entire premise for impeaching Donald Trump is rooted in a cemetery of Democrat crimes. Crimes we are uncovering piece by piece and fitting into a sinister picture bigger than we ever imagined. In part 2 of this exclusive OAN Investigates, we uncover the smoking gun. Watch as the 3 Ukrainian witnesses OAN tracked down swear under oath before cameras and share their testimony. We invite you to tune in as America's jury. Listen, watch, and understand the side of the story Democrats are trying to hide from you in their impeachment inquisition. Come back for the rest of this incredible story with our special guest, Rudy Giuliani. I'm Chanel Rian for One American News Investigates in Washington. Thank you for joining us. In part 1 of this One American News Investigates, we brought you President Trump's personal attorney and America's mayor, Rudy Giuliani. Together, we waded through a dark and murky swamp of deep state collusion, Democrat impeachment delusions, and nefarious charges against Giuliani. Giuliani debunks some central premises. Rudy Giuliani did not investigate Ukraine in search of Biden dirt. Giuliani started looking into Ukraine way before Joe Biden ever decided to run for president. Biden's corrupt dealings in Ukraine inevitably became a part of that investigation. Again, way before Biden ever ran for office. In this special edition of One American News Investigates, our Ukrainian witnesses arrive and we hold our own hearing where you, the American people, are jury. You decide. You hear from top Ukrainian diplomats and officials who serve as witnesses to testify under oath their side of the story. The side that not only vindicates President Trump amidst 3 years of a Democrat impeachment circus, but if investigated by our Justice Department, could spell the end of Adam Schiff and Democrat credibility for years to come. For each success President Trump adds to his historic first term, Democrat dreams of a 2020 White House grow dimmer. Democrats have since realized impeachment is increasingly their only hope, seemingly at all costs, something they realized from day one, but has become a realization that's only grown more desperate as we enter the eve of election 2020. In July of 2019, Democrats seemed to feel they found their impeachment kill shot. For this next act in the Democrats' impeachment fairy tale, they needed a villain, a damsel, and a prince. In this case for the Democrats, their damsel in distress is Joe Biden, innocent in every conceivable way. The Democrats' villains of choice? President Trump and his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. And, of course, Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler were to share the heroic princely duties. Earlier in this series, One American News sat down with Rudy Giuliani. He told us how he got involved with Ukraine, how his curiosity about Ukraine was sparked by an unverified report of Democrat collusion, a report he then verified with documents and witnesses. Next, Giuliani showed how all this took place under Mueller, not over Joe Biden, and how by default no one could look into the corruption of Ukraine in the last few years without running headlong into the story of Joe Biden and his involvement in pulling the political strings in Ukraine in order to protect his son, Hunter Biden, the one with the cocaine, fidelity, and money laundering problems.
If this were a trial, your first 3 witnesses would be Shokin, Kuliak, and Kolonitsky. All 3 of them say, it's not just one witness, it's not just Shokin. All 3 of them say that Joe Biden put Hunter Biden in in order to protect the Burisma company.
Giuliani is referring here to Viktor Shokin, the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, who Joe Biden allegedly bribed the Ukrainian government to fire in order to stop investigating his son Hunter Biden. Shokin and the other two names Giuliani references here are witnesses OAN tried to get to the U.S., but each ran into visa issues at the border. Those three witnesses would provide bombshell testimony proving that Biden was in league with the former Ukrainian government, illegally bribing and threatening Ukraine unless they closed the investigations into Biden's son Hunter.
So if I were trying this case like I did many, many bribery cases, and I may gratuitously add never lost one, if I were trying it, I would put those first three witnesses up. They'd establish the bribery. I'd put in the evidence of the money laundering. I'd show how the money got to him in surreptitious ways. I would get those conversations about setting up the bribe that the State Department still hasn't released.
When we return, we introduce you to the three Ukrainians and what each of them bring to the story. Then we swear them in. Don't go anywhere. You're watching a One American News Investigates exclusive with Rudy Giuliani and special guests. You won't want to miss what they have to say. We come back to previewing our three witnesses with President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. Three of them each bring a narrative utterly inconvenient for Adam Schiff and the Democrats as their impeachment inquiry snakes its way into impeachment proper. So who are they, and why should we listen to them? Andrei Teleshenko, the former Ukrainian diplomat to the Embassy of Ukraine here in Washington. He was the former advisor to the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, and the former advisor to the first deputy prime minister of Ukraine on security and intelligence. What is important about his testimony?
So another whole area of crime here, collusion. So Andrei Teleshenko was in a very, very strong position to observe this. He worked in the prosecutor's office as a fairly young man at a fairly low level. He can testify that Biden's son was under investigation, which the Biden people are lying about. He can testify that the case wasn't debunked, which the Biden people are lying about, and so is the American media, NBC, CBS, the New York Times. If the case was debunked, there's no evidence. There's no debunking report, right? Because nobody debunked it. And then Andrei can explain the other side of this case that's equally as damaging, and that is the tremendous amount of interference by the Ukrainian government in the 2016 election at the request of the Democratic National Committee, the Hillary Clinton campaign, Fusion GPS. He was there for direct conversations with the ambassador, who eventually had to be dismissed.
Next witness, Mikhailo Okendovsky. He is the former head of Ukraine's Central Election Commission, one of the most influential positions in the Ukrainian government. Tell us why we are hearing from him.
Well, it's relevant because, first of all, when you prosecute a case or try a case or you try to search for the truth, every witness is going to have some issue. Shokin has some credibility issues. How do you deal with it? You deal with it by some other witness who maybe has different issues but corroborates it. You know, people forget that we convict criminals on the testimony of people like Sammy the Bull, people who cooperate. Criminals do business with other criminals. He can testify to the substantial involvement of the U.S. government and Joe Biden in trying to collect dirty information on Trump and the Trump campaign. And then he can also establish how much money Poroshenko took. That was well known. How much money Yatsenuk took. That was well known.
Petro Poroshenko, president of Ukraine from 2014 to 2019, was seen as a close friend and ally to Vice President Joe Biden. Poroshenko was initially praised as being the outsider Ukrainians hoped could battle decades of corruption.
Why is that important? That shows that whole thing about Biden wanted Shokin fired because he was corrupt is untrue. Because all he cared about was minor corruption, but didn't seem to care about somebody stealing most of the country, who he was palling around with.
Okendowski's testimony debunks the Schiff and Biden narrative that DNC collusion with Ukraine was all a giant conspiracy theory. Next, we have Andrei Artemenko, and he is a former member of Ukrainian parliament.
Artemenko was an opponent of Poroshenko for several reasons. Artemenko probably picked up earlier than most what a big crook Poroshenko was. Poroshenko came into office with a great deal of hope. Two very, very knowledgeable Ukrainians told me he's become the biggest crook in the country. And I said, why? And they said he wasn't content being a millionaire. He wanted to be a billionaire. And he wanted to be an oligarch like, the ones he sees around him. So Artemenko recognized that fairly early. He was a major opponent of Poroshenko.
Artemenko became an outspoken critic of Biden's friend, then President Poroshenko. Giuliani says Artemenko, who had been pro-Ukrainian his entire life in his opposition to Poroshenko, was then painted as a pro-Russian spy by Poroshenko and his media minions, despite the fact that Poroshenko was known to have been buying used equipment from Russia, a country killing Ukrainians daily.
And then finally, he can deal with the one really big dramatic transaction that has actually resulted in a court finding of illegal behavior by the Ukrainians with the Democrats in Ukraine, and that is the Black Ledger. The Black Ledger was necessary because the FBI had closed a case on Manafort 2 years earlier. Now they were asked to revive it, kind of as a political hit on the president. They needed new evidence. They didn't have new evidence, and lo and behold, a Black Ledger shows up on the doorstep of a parliamentarian. He runs to other parliamentarians that were all against Trump. This is supposed to be a book of bribes from the Party of Regions in which Manafort, on 22 occasions, signed next to a bribe.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. And this evidence was not done for law enforcement purposes, because before law enforcement had a chance to even open the book, the information was given to the New York Times by Alexandra Chalupa.
The Ukrainians finally arrived. We met with them briefly in our offices before going on camera to clarify and ensure everyone understood what they were about to do. We were about to swear them in on camera before America, and they would soon be giving their side of the story about how the Democrat Party and Joe Biden's dealings in Ukraine affected each and every one of them, and in turn affected America. They brought with them documents and files, transcripts, articles, and press releases. They were ready to share their story, and a story that would take days to unravel. We were going to capture it all on camera. We brought in one Ukrainian translator and a court reporter. After everyone was mic'd up and ready for the cameras, the room grew still and everyone was sworn in. Our witnesses bring with them damning testimony on what Giuliani calls a smoking gun of Democrat criminality. Their testimony pulls the rug out from under Adam Schiff's central premise that Trump was wrong to ask about Joe Biden and the Democrat Party's starring role in Ukrainian corruption. We bring you admissible evidence, as opposed to Adam Schiff's slew of inadmissible evidence. Stay right here. We'll be right back. Our three Ukrainian witnesses swore under oath to tell the American people the absolute truth as they were about to testify firsthand accounts of DNC collusion and how the Democrat Party had been interfering with the American election in order to keep Donald Trump from victory. This is where we need to brush up on the Black Ledger, the so-called Book of Bribes that pointed a big accusatory finger at Paul Manafort, claiming it was proof Team Trump took money from the Russians.
Basically, the Black Ledger was produced somewhere in late May of 2016. It was a blockbuster. It showed that Manafort, and then it came out over June and July, that Manafort was taking bribes, signed for them in the Black Ledger.
He signed his own bribes.
He signed his own bribes in the Black Ledger.
Now, you asked him
And
about
therefore,
this, right?
and therefore, he had to be fired as the as the campaign manager of Donald Trump.
Enter DNC operative Alexandra Chalupa, whose fingerprints are largely associated with the document.
There's a big story happening here in America, and it's not being told by the mass media how it really happened, what really happened behind the scenes, starting from the prosecutor's office in Ukraine with an investigation into Burisma case and Hunter Biden, ending with the situation here in America where you had the Ukrainian embassy colluding and working with the DNC on the behalf of Ambassador Chali and his DCM Oksana Shulyar
And this is
from
first-hand
Ukraine.
information.
I was a first-hand witness of all these processes, starting from the prosecutor's office and then with the situation here in the Ukrainian embassy in Washington.
Teleshenko says he was instructed at the embassy to keep an eye out for any dirt against candidate Trump, and if he found anything, to alert Chalupa. All this dirt collecting takes us to January 2016. At this time, the Trump campaign is 7 months old, and already Trump holds a sizable lead in a crowded Republican primary. Polls placed Trump at a whopping 35%, leaving second-place contender Ted Cruz in the dust at 18%. In January, Teleshenko attends a meeting at the Obama White House. There, he says, the Obama NSC asked for any information and dirt on the Party of Regions, a pro-Russia political party in Ukraine.
Yeah, there was a meeting with the three prosecutors, the two deputy prosecutors, Sakuralidze and Khodnitsky, and head of NABU, Mr. Sitnik, who were in Washington for a 3-day visit. And there was a meeting at the White House where
That you were at.
that I was at and I was involved in with the delegation from the Ukrainian side with those three prosecutors.
The person who would arrange this visit for Teleshenko and the Ukrainians? An Obama NSC member named Eric Shermella. Teleshenko showed us the White House logs as evidence. Shermella was a member of both the Obama and Trump NSC, was a Ukraine expert, worked for the CIA, is a registered Democrat, traveled with Joe Biden, and was reportedly fired from the Trump White House for sabotaging documents. His co-workers, who also left the Trump White House under dubious circumstances, now work for Adam Schiff. Interestingly, Shermella's profile fits the exact profile of the so-called whistleblower who started this entire impeachment inquiry.
Mr. Chairmanella got my invitation into the White House and
Those
other
logs.
staff.
We have to be careful with Mr. Charamella.
Right.
He's one of the protected species in Washington.
Can you tell us what you were there for the White House for? Who called the meeting?
The Department of Justice asked them to come to Washington for a training meeting in Washington for 3 days.
Okay.
The first meeting we had was in the White House, Obama White House, National Security Council, at the Eisenhower Building.
5 months after Teleshenko interacted with Chalupa, Chalupa wrote DNC comms director Louise Miranda about how she discussed Paul Manafort with Ukrainian reporters and was keeping her pal at the New York Times, Michael Isikoff, up to speed. Isikoff is the reporter who would ultimately break the Black Ledger story. Chalupa adds in her email she had a Trump component.
That's an admission of exactly what they investigated Donald Trump for 2.5 years to the tune of $35 million.
Mayor Giuliani, why is his testimony important to the general discussion as we discuss corruption in Ukraine?
Andrei Teleshenko's testimony is critical because, first of all, it should be pointed out, it's corroborated by 8 or 10 other people. Second, you said something that just struck me immediately when you said to him, you have firsthand knowledge. We just sat through 2 weeks of Adam Schiff putting us through second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth hand knowledge. This man has firsthand knowledge. So you can attack his credibility all you want. And the enemies here have done that. Attack their credibility, my credibility. But you can't say it isn't evidence. He has personal evidence. Just one example, the American media and American law enforcement doesn't give a darn about this evidence. He's not anonymous. He's not an anonymous informant. He's not an anonymous whistleblower. He's not hiding behind a curtain. He's sitting right there and he's saying, that woman who worked for the Democratic National Committee asked me to get foreign information that could be inserted into an American campaign that was going to be leaked to the press and that would blow up his campaign and destroy him as a candidate.
So a political party in the United States working with a foreign government to actually affect or change the outcome of a U.S. election.
On purpose and provable, but ignored by the mass media and ignored by, even more tragically, the Justice Department and the FBI.
Days after Chalupa's email, the Black Ledger debuts, landing on the House steps of Ukrainian politicians and media. Lo and behold, Michael Isikoff of the New York Times broke the story about the Black Ledger on the U.S. side on how it implicated Manafort and the Trump campaign. It landed on the doorstep of Andrei Artemenko's home. Artemenko, at the time, was a member of the Ukrainian parliament and says he found the documents and didn't know what they were initially.
First of all, it's copies. It's not the original. It's not even one original copy. I saw it in my own eyes. I've been there.
So they were copies?
I realized it's like maybe like the bookkeeping documents, or maybe something related to some companies. But I didn't find any names like Party of Region.
Finally, we turn to the chairman of the Election Commission, Michael Okendowski. Okendowski never knew Chalupa, yet was very personally affected by the Black Ledger. Okendowski became a target when he started raising public questions over the integrity of certain election results under Biden's pal, President Poroshenko.
You all of a sudden find yourself listed in the Black Ledger.
Yes. To be precise, this number of sheets of paper is allegedly called a Black Ledger of a particular party, of the Party of Regions.
Okendowski's name is listed as one of the names to have received compensation in the Black Ledger.
And that Black Ledger, as far as it relates to you, which you found out in late May of 2016 or so.
Later even,
right?
Later.
So you found out that Black Ledger had 4 payments to you. Something like $1,500.
It doesn't even say that it's about
reimbursement for travel, right?
It says about compensation of travel expenses, but it doesn't say that this money were actually paid to me.
Did you get $16,000 in travel expenses?
No.
Is that true? So the entry about you is false?
Yes.
And the purported initials are false?
Exactly.
So as far as you know, with regard to you, the Black Ledger is phony.
Exactly.
When we return, we next address another stunning fact about the Black Ledger that Democrats are conveniently ignoring. The implications of proving the Black Ledger is a manufactured document doctored by Democrats has grave implications, assuming our Justice and State Departments don't continue to cover it all up. We just asked 2 of our 3 witnesses about the Black Ledger. Remember, anyone who dares question the authenticity of this book of bribes is immediately labeled a tinfoil Mad Hatter by Democrats. And for Democrats, it is imperative that they continue to insist the document is real and is proof Trump is an agent of Russia. If proven that Democrats funded, manufactured, and peddled this document in conjunction with Ukraine to take down candidate Trump, they risk losing any scrap of credibility they have left when it comes to impeaching this president. But 2 of our 4 witnesses just provided compelling testimony. The Black Ledger has Democrat fingerprints all over it. If true, this would debunk Schiff's claims that the Black Ledger is a real document.
It is absolutely fake material, and as regards to some particular lines, allegedly of handwriting similar to my handwriting, I'm totally sure that I know for sure that I never wrote that.
Signed.
I never wrote that, and I never signed.
You are a very significant witness here.
The handwriting is really similar to mine. Signatures are really similar to mine. But as member of the Central Election Commission for 15 years, I have signed tens of thousands of documents, and my signature was the possession of many institutions in Ukraine.
So you say that your signature was forged?
My handwriting and my signature obviously do not belong to me.
Our 3rd witness, the former member of Ukrainian Parliament, Andrei Artemenko, adds a shocking and inconvenient detail. The Party of Region, from whom this ledger allegedly came from, ceased to exist by February 2014. Okendowski adds that nowhere on the Black Ledger is mention of the Party of Regions, yet it is arbitrarily reported as coming from the party. And Artemenko notes how the Black Ledger covers a period from 2007 until 2012. Artemenko reminds us how the Party of Regions office suffered a massive fire by an arsonist. This Black Ledger, adds Okendowski and Artemenko, if the dates are to be believed, had to have survived this fire by some miracle.
Everyone knows that. There was an arson at the office of the Party of Region. The office was burned and one person was killed. I was very much surprised that four years later, after the last date indicated in the so-called ledger, and more than 2 years later, Party of Region ceased its active operations as political party, the so-called ledger appeared in Ukraine. The way it was presented to public created feeling that it is a very well orchestrated screenplay of a pulp fiction movie or a political thriller written well in advance and not in Ukraine.
Artemenko concurs, adding the ledger was made in America.
You call them Black Ledger, it comes from here, it's not from Ukraine. We never even used it.
Both Okendowski and Artemenko believe the U.S. Embassy was involved in the manufacture and dissemination of the Black Ledger.
Every individual, every institution participated in presenting these materials to public was in some context, in some way, in my opinion, linked to United States Embassy in Kyiv. Who participated in looking very, very artificial, was very artificial, some context, in some way, in my opinion, linked to United States Embassy in Kyiv. Who participated in looking very, very artificial, was very artificial, some context, in some way, in my opinion, linked to United States Embassy in Kyiv.
Manufactured document by the Democrats.
Remind the jury why that's
Well, it's important for this reason. They had closed down the case on Manafort in 2014. Greenaway, the FBI agent, apparently, it's important for this reason. The ambassador, they had closed down the case, rejuvenate the case in 2014. And that conversation from the Obama White House was, Greenaway, the FBI go find us evidence on the party. It's important for this reason, so we can reopen the case. The FBI had taken the position. That conversation, we closed the case. We analyzed all the evidence then. So it's going to look stupid if we reopen it for no reason. The FBI had taken this is very common. We closed the case. Newly discovered evidence. We analyzed all the evidence. Now you've got to make a decision. It's going to look stupid. Was there really newly discovered evidence? This Black Ledger is very common. Or did they make up newly discovered evidence? So here's the reason why you would think they made it up. All the records are really newly destroyed in 2014. Did they make up? The chance that this ledger survived is, so here's the reason why you would think they made it up. If it did survive, all the records are really, I kind of as a prosecutor want to see a couple of burn marks. 2014. Did they make up? A little burn, a few burn. At least they could have done a better job, like little match, thrown a few ashes on it. Kind of, and the mafia would have done that. And but even then, we could have probably proved it was.
All of this was happening under President Poroshenko's watch, Joe Biden's friend and ally. Each witness then relayed how each of their reputations were maligned soon after they started speaking out against elections corruption, DNC collusion, or suspicions about this Black Ledger and where it came from. At this point, we step back and ask, what's the other side of the story? Democrats in their media statements claim each and every one of these men are either spies or compromised figures. At this point, for the diplomat Teleshenko, Democrats diminish his title as a minor player in the embassy and someone who offers no evidence. Add to this a healthy dose of a baseless Russian spy accusation. Democrats to this, Teleshenko offered us his CV in the background. As advisor to the Prosecutor General's office, Teleshenko outraged even diplomats Democrats have brought in as star witnesses for themselves. Outranking men like George Kent, the smear campaign against against Teloshenko began, he says, after he started speaking out at the embassy and left in June of 2016. Teloshenko decided to whistleblow on the collusional activities he had witnessed. Against Teloshenko began,
will
he
go to
says,
official
after
channels
he started
to
speaking
get this
out
case
at the
investigated by the
embassy
FBI,
and
the
left in
Department of
June
Justice,
2016. Teloshenko
through the State
decided to
Department,
whistleblow
official
on
channels.
collusional
And I was blocked and put as a
activities
Russian spy also.
against
Renko, and to try to destroy my reputation, so nobody would listen to me in Washington, and nobody would take me seriously. And then when I got this information as a Russian spy, also evidence, then Renko got even worse, but still at least I know that it's going to get investigated. And
For Artemenko, his fate was more than a smearing in the media. As a member of the U.S.-Ukrainian caucus, he watched U.S. politics closely. During the 2016 campaign, he came out in support of Donald Trump, the candidate. This support, combined with his popularity and his outspokenness against Poroshenko and Poroshenko's relationship with Joe Biden, resulted in Artemenko being stripped of his Ukrainian citizenship. He says his story is a mere snapshot of a far bigger problem happening geopolitically between the U.S. and Ukraine.
The American people deserve to know truth. What exactly happens in Ukraine during the campaign 2016? What exactly happens in the highest level of Ukrainian politics and most important things with the decision maker who lives in Ukraine, who've been part of Revolution and Dignity, who fighting against corruption, who fighting against everything what is wrong in Ukraine the years. Unfortunately, they fighting against Republicans in general, against President Trump in person, and how they try to support the Democrats in general, and Hillary Clinton in person during the campaign 2016.
Artemenko, a lifelong Ukrainian loyalist, was soon granted that default one-accusation-fits-all. He was accused of being a Russian spy for trying to negotiate a truce between Ukraine and Russia. Getting ahead of themselves and not bothering to ask any questions, the New York Times ran with the story, going one step further.
February 19, 2017, the New York Times published the article. We find out the back channel between Trump and Putin. In the middle of this back channel, this is member of Ukrainian parliament, Andriy Artemenko.
They accused you of being
me, exactly me. It's divided my life before.
You were the back
after.
channel to Putin?
I been the back channel between Trump and Putin.
Did you talk to the New York Times?
He's a spy. He's also a spy.
Accuse me
and we got him here. We better watch out. He's a spy.
Two quick questions, just to finish up the New York Times accusation that
Oh,
you
yeah,
are
please.
a Putin-Trump back channel.
Thank you.
Have you ever met Vladimir Putin?
No, never.
You've never spoken to him?
I never spoken to him. I never met him.
Have you ever met Donald Trump?
No, I never met him.
As for the former election commissioner Michael Okendowski, the Ukrainian media began piling onto him also. Okendowski claims his name was thrown into the black ledger as a means to legitimize it, and his family has endured libel and slander from the media as a result, including an absurd fake news moment when the media accused Okendowski of living in a house bigger than the White House, wealthy from such spoils as his $16,000 in the black ledger. Here's the house Soros-funded media pushed as belonging to Okendowski. Here's the house he lives in.
They needed to discredit the statements I did at that time, and they have chosen the way of discrediting me personally, rather than discrediting my statements, which were absolutely true and correct at that time. Went to court against one of TV channels who spread that news, and that TV channel immediately offered amicable settlement agreement. They immediately admitted that this information was false and incorrect, but nevertheless, many Ukrainians still believe that that legendary house, that miracle house, still believes to me and my family.
These three witnesses have just provided personal, first-hand testimony about what Rudy Giuliani calls the smoking gun of DNC collusion. They each implored Americans to urge our state and Justice Department to look into DNC collusion that took place in their country. A crime, they say, that should not go overlooked and is ultimately divisive and damaging in U.S.-Ukrainian relations. Next up, we dig into a proverbial burial site called Burisma, a haunted ground of dismissed cases, fired officials, and millions of dollars. Brace yourselves. The clues and testimony we find next with our 3 witnesses should have every American outraged. Having discussed and laid out the Burisma case in Part 1, I asked our witnesses about the current state of investigations on Burisma. Under U.S. Ambassador Yovanovitch, who testified in Adam Schiff's impeachment hearings, accusing Giuliani of smearing her reputation, Yovanovitch is attributed to having closed whatever remaining cases were left open on Burisma once Biden got the prosecutor general fired. Under the Zelensky administration, however, there is hope, especially with figures like new prosecutor Konstantin Kulik. Just hours before our panel in D.C., Kulik announced he would reopen the Burisma investigations and investigate also Burisma's founder Zlochevsky.
Как независимый прокурор открывает новое уголовное дело.
To open these cases as an independent prosecutor to continue investigation.
However, while taping this segment, Kulik was fired. As of this broadcast, we are still collecting facts surrounding his firing.
I interviewed Mr. Kulik. He has very, very substantial knowledge of the whole thing, of the collusion, the Black Book, the bribery, the Biden bribery, the extent of it.
Я делаю очевидный логический вывод, что он был уволен.
He's another witness. He would,
по команде со стороны реальных владельцев. Генерального прокурора и его конечных владельцев в США.
Right. You know, if I put this case together and tried it as a Hobbs Act extortion case or Foreign Corrupt Practices Act case, or a Kulik would be the second witness. Shokin would be the first witness. Kulik would be the second witness. Kolonitsky would be the third witness. Joe's tape would be the fourth witness.
These people that you have named right now, they do not have an opportunity to come to the United States and testify here.
This is where our panel then dived into the political weeds of the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine and how it is entangled in a system of NGOs who are directly funded, say our witnesses, by George Soros money. Okendowski argues that the Ukrainian system needs to be completely overhauled. It is currently run by a complicated system of third-party NGOs like NABU, the Anti-Corruption Bureau, facades for Soros money, and a globalist agenda, wholly endorsed by the Democrat Party.
Мені дуже не подобається ситуація, коли українська дійсність підтверджує, що боротьба з корупцією є однією із форм, в яких існує корупція.
Well, I don't like the situation with actually, and that is the Ukrainian reality, I would say so, that fighting corruption.
Okendowski explains how in Ukraine, George Kent, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, actually got involved and helped create many of these so-called anti-corruption agencies and systems. Kent was a key Schiff witness.
So, if I understand you correctly, George Kent, who worked for the State Department, drafted the NABU-SAP laws, which were based on the George Soros ANTAC model. They were forced through. They took all of the corruption cases out of the Prosecutor General's office and gave it to them. And then it is widely reported, the NABU was run by the American Embassy and told what to do by the American Embassy. Am I wrong about that? Is that an incorrect assumption?
Я особисто не знайомий з паном Кентом.
Okendowski says this is the understanding in Ukraine, but he doesn't have direct knowledge. He does know, however, George Kent was allegedly involved in personally blocking Okendowski's visa.
Was trying to block.
You tried to block your visa?
My next visa.
When was that?
It was in the end of his tenure at the embassy in 2018.
but his name was mentioned in the context of canceling my visit to the United States as chairman of the Central Election Commission in August of 2018. Allegedly, his position was that Mr. Hindovsky can never be admitted to the territory of the United States.
Does this happen a lot in Ukraine, that visas get canceled by the embassy because they don't want...
I know from media that visas for many Ukrainian officials who wanted to come to Ukraine, to the United States to testify in particular cases, were deliberately either blocked or canceled by U.S. Embassy officials in Kyiv.
Okindovsky, ever the lawyer, emphasizes he doesn't have material evidence for these visa blockages.
Now, this is something that Andrei could actually speak to as
well.
Yeah, I met Mr. Kent a couple of times throughout my professional career.
So he created this anti-corruption agency.
2014, he comes in and talks about pushing and forming NABU, pushing all the powers from the prosecutor's office and giving it mostly to the NABU, and making it as an independent body for Ukrainians. But
right.
The outcome was that it was an independent body for Ukrainians because it was a dependent body for the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. And the second time I met Mr. Kent was when I organized a meeting for him, which he testified for with the impeachment hearings, and when he met with the Deputy Prosecutor General of Ukraine, talking about Burisma. He was really pushy, he was really unofficial, and he was really pushing on the Deputy Prosecutor General and going above his pay grade to telling what Ukraine should do or should not do.
One of my major problems from the time I started this investigation back last year at this time is the interference of the American Embassy in allowing people to come here who have relevant evidence about Democratic collusion in the 2016 election, Democratic corruption in Ukraine, Democratic bribery, and extortion. It started when I first asked for Shokin, and he was denied a visa, having been put on a list of corrupt people that he had never been on before, even though when I asked what are the charges, no one could mention any charges. Now it continues. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to Ukrainian prosecutors, whether it's Mr. Kulyuk or Kodnitsky or Lutsenko or you, Teleshenko, and you gentlemen, about how difficult it is to get visas. So is that correct? And who's doing this? Why is it so hard to get visas if all you're coming here to do is to give information to the press or to law enforcement?
They're blocking it for different reasons.
They act as a filter as to who can and who cannot come to the United States to give authentic, true, and correct information as to what is really going on in our country.
Well, who makes that decision?
Somebody at the embassy. I don't know the names. I once tried to discuss that with U.S. Ambassador Mrs. Yovanovich in Kyiv. I even wrote a personal letter to her after my visit to the United States was canceled in August 2018. I sent it personally to her, and then I raised this issue when I personally met her. It seems to me in September 2018. She pretended she doesn't know. She pretended she didn't know what I'm talking about.
Now, do you have a visa now?
I have visa. I have visa which expires in 2026, but I have information that the next visa, if I apply for it, will not be issued to me. It is blocked at the level of U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. I hope that I will not receive a notice of cancellation of my visa as soon as I return to Ukraine after this visit.
But you wouldn't be surprised?
I wouldn't be surprised, absolutely.
Unfortunately, the people who works in the embassy, they decided who is the appropriate to visit of the United States and who's supposed to be denied. Even the last examples, what happens with Mr. Kulik. I would like to remind you, they sent the official letter to Department of Justice in the latest August 2000. Yes, exactly.
This is the letter. So that we make everything current, there are presently 3 gentlemen who are seeking a visa in Kyiv to come here and to tell us about collusion, about bribery, about the removal of the prosecutor for the purpose of protecting Biden's son, Zlochevsky, Burisma, all of these very important matters. None of them have ever been accused of corruption. None of them have been convicted of corruption. And they're all being held up. And Mr. Kulyuk had made an actual formal application back in August to come here, in which he laid out all the facts and the information that he'd be able to provide to us, which, as I read it, would go a long way in helping to prove federal crimes.
Correct. And what happens yesterday, a few days ago, when they just opened a new investigation against Burisma? He was fired.
So the embassy has not acted on this, or have they denied it?
They put on hold. No response.
So this is put on hold, and Mr. Karlitsky's
the same thing with Mr.
Karlitsky.
Put on hold.
Yes.
He's an
and Mr. Shokin has been on hold for at least a year.
And it's 2 years. 2 years.
2 years.
And Mr. Karlitsky is an acting special prosecutor of Ukraine. He's a high government position official who wants to come to the United States, and his visa has also been put on hold.
So this is outrageous. There are 3 responsible people who want to come to the United States to describe to us very high crimes that were committed at the highest levels of our government, which can only be determined by investigation. And they're being held, really, in Ukraine and not allowed to come here. Mr. Taylor's embassy is holding them back. Could it be that he testified recently? It was a rather confusing bit of testimony, but he is a somewhat elderly man. It was a confusing bit of testimony where he didn't seem to know anything. I mean, he didn't know who told him things, and
how could they know what happened if they never questioned people?
Do you
like
think
me or
this is a
Mr.
question of Mr. Taylor just not knowing what's happening in his embassy? Or do you think it's a question of Mr. Taylor not wanting witnesses to come here that will contradict the theories that he propounded before the House? Is there any possible reason to hold up these visas, except not to want America to hear this information?
These are questions lacking innocent answers. They also lack oversight. Where is our law enforcement in all of this? Where is our FBI? The silence is deafening. None of this has been investigated on our side, something that seems to demonstrate a blaring double standard not only in our justice system, but in our fourth estate. Where media is supposed to be our society's watchdogs, it has instead become the guard dogs of a Democrat junkyard of cash, corruption, and dirty manufactured evidence designed to undermine the will of the American people. This story is not going anywhere anytime soon. We'll be right back. We return to some tantalizing questions posed at the State Department. Why is our U.S. Embassy in Ukraine under George Kent denying visas to key witnesses who could provide our Justice Department valuable information? Artemenko says the answer is obvious.
It's politically motivated decision by the Ambassador Taylor, by the people who working in the consulate department of the U.S. Embassy in Kiev.
And this is
then why were they doing it? They serve to the Democrats. They serve to the Mr. Soros.
Here, Okendowski jumped in and added that the American people have a right to know that their taxpayer dollars are being misappropriated and misused by their U.S. State Department in Ukraine in order to obstruct justice and shield millions of dollars worth of corruption down the line. This State Department is being run by a single political party.
How do you see this being solved?
It has to be solved through a right now investigation. What the President of the United States asked Mr. Zelensky to, together with Attorney General Barr and the FBI, to investigate what really happened in Ukraine, and it's going to outflow this investigation what happened here in the United States, and to give the public, American public, Ukrainian public, investigation has to be done in Ukraine together with United States authorities, and to show the public what really happened.
Here in the United States, there's a certain reaction among Democrats, not Republicans or independents, but Democrats, particularly Schiff and people like that this was a terrible conversation that the president had with Mr. Zelensky. I read the conversation. It seems very cordial.
It seems like a normal conversation. Mr. Zelensky has said he wasn't pressured by it numerous times. How was it received in Ukraine? Do people in Ukraine think this was...
They don't understand what the fuss is about here in Washington. It's like, what are you guys talking about? Yeah. What happened? I, as a former government official, saw talks with the U.S. ambassador before on a normal level where we had more quid pro quo, more pressure than during this phone call.
Me personally, having graduated from International Law Department of the Institute of International Relations, I didn't notice anything unusual in the transcript in that conversation. It was polite. It was a conversation of presidents of two alien states. And me personally, I don't see any ground for the start of impeachment proceedings, which started here in the United States based on that conversation. In Ukraine, many people believe that that request for investigation was just a request for justice.
That's the investigation I began in November of 2018.
Exactly.
Which was 2 years before Biden was going to run for office. 6 months before he announced for office. It was in the middle of the Mueller investigation. And the way it was presented to me, there's evidence in the Ukraine of collusion, much worse than anything in Russia, if anything took place in Russia. But worse than that, Biden is involved in it, and he's involved in getting secret money, Pinchuk's secret money, to Hillary, illegally. At that time, he was in the middle of the Mueller investigation, the president was.
And you were his personal
And as his defense attorney, this is like gold. All of a sudden, I can prove somebody else committed the crime. And as his defense attorney, started it. This is like gold. And the President of the United States, all of a sudden, I can tell you this. I can prove somebody else committed the crime. Asking for this. And as his defense attorney, he's mostly interested in the collusion. This is like gold. And the President of the United States, he spent, all of a sudden, 100 lines. I can prove somebody else committed the crime. And as his defense attorney, he's mostly interested in the collusion. His real interest is the collusion because he wants it to stop.
He's asking for.
And he really believes that he has a president. And it's a bit of a test of this president, which we said at the beginning. Is he going to be what we always hoped Poroshenko would be, or him, or is he going to go the other way? And I think he feels if he can show he can investigate and clean up this historical corruption, we got a good chance.
A good chance after years of embedded corruption at the highest levels, something Ukrainians and the Trump administration are cautiously optimistic is due for a change that can only be accomplished under the right leadership.
In Part 3 of the special edition of One American News Investigates, we continue to dismantle the Democrats' impeachment inquiry. Our investigation next takes us thousands of miles to Eastern Europe. There, our search took us from Budapest to Kiev to Vienna. We captured on tape more witnesses, each with a side of the story America should be hearing amidst Democrat impeachment inquiries. For this mission, One American News brought Rudy Giuliani. His hundreds of hours and months of research into what he calls the great political scandal of our time made him the only person to go with us on this trip. What we found will both astound and enrage. Get ready. You're about to hear a side of the story kept from you not only by a complacent media, but by a biased State Department and a Democrat Party desperate to cover its tracks.
We have now sunk to a depth at which restatement of the obvious is the first duty of intelligent men. George Orwell. December 2019, Washington, D.C. We find House Speaker Nancy Pelosi reigning over a rambling impeachment inquiry that has spun well out of her gavel's reach. Hers is a party ceaseless in its shrill desire to oust President Donald Trump, whose administration is credited for the lowest unemployment rates in history, the highest stock markets in memory, and a cultural movement bigger than any single political party. For Pelosi and Democrats, 2020 is looking dismal. Theirs is a party lacking inspiration, leadership, and ideas, bogged down by a grungy kaleidoscope of gender-bent radicals, faceless mobs, and Greenpeace fanatics. In their own words,
I'm concerned that if we don't impeach this president, he will get reelected.
With their Russia collusion scheme dead in the hands of Robert Mueller over the summer, the Democrats picked themselves up by the bootstraps. New season, new crime. The crime? It changed by the hour, but seemed to more or less settle on the idea that Trump must be impeached because he withheld aid from Ukraine and asked Ukraine to look into corruption and Joe Biden. Little did they foresee that their evidence was not only inadmissible in a court of law, but that their inquiry would only expose their star candidate, Joe Biden, to actual scrutiny over his dealings in Ukraine. In part one, we sat down with President Trump's personal attorney, America's Mayor Rudy Giuliani. We broke down the Schiff and Democrat charges. We asked why Giuliani was involved in Ukraine in the first place, addressed the so-called conspiracy theories, and discussed Schiff's ragtag lineup of second-hand witnesses. In part two, we introduced 3 Ukrainian witnesses tracked down and flown into Washington, a top official, a diplomat, and a member of Ukrainian parliament. Each gave first-hand sworn testimony that the Democrat Party colluded with Ukrainian officials to interfere in our 2016 elections. More specifically, the Democrat Party enlisted the help of a foreign government to harm the Republican Party candidate, Donald J. Trump, committing the exact crime Democrats accused President Trump of committing during the Mueller investigation. In concluding part two, we learned there were witnesses who claimed to have testimony and evidence directly contradicting the Democrats' one-sided impeachment inquisition.
This is a pattern that's been going on for 2 years. Must have at least 5 or 6 or 7 Ukrainian witnesses who will say that over the course of the last 2 years, they've tried to come to the United States to give us evidence of vast collusion by the Ukrainians to affect Democrats in the 2016 election, and solid evidence of the corruption involved in Biden getting his son in order to protect the Burisma company. There are presently 3 gentlemen who are seeking a visa in Kyiv to come here and to tell us about collusion, about bribery, about the removal of the prosecutor for the purpose of protecting Biden's son, Zlochevsky, Burisma, all of these very important matters. None of them have ever been accused of corruption. None of them have been convicted of corruption. And they're all being held up.
For the Democrat impeachment charge against President Trump to hold water, 2 things had to be true for them. 1, Joe Biden and his son Hunter had to have committed no wrongdoing in Ukraine. Otherwise, any investigation by any law enforcer in America would prove to have been a duty. So far in this series, we found multiple crimes in Ukraine the Bidens have committed: extortion, bribery, and money laundering. We also heard compelling evidence indicating the DNC and Ukrainian officials, through Alexandra Chalupa, colluded in 2016 to interfere with elections and conspired to violate U.S. laws. And Giuliani says the best evidence against the Bidens is Joe Biden's own words.
If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a got fired.
Probably prosecuted 20 bribery cases. I know the elements cold. I remember judges charging juries. These are the elements of the crime of bribery. I don't think I'd have ever seen as concise and as tight and as clear a confession. But worse than that, I saw a confession with proof of guilty knowledge by leaving his son out. We prove intent by lying, lies of omission, lies of commission, because we can't look in somebody's brain. So what we have is we got the clear crime of bribery. He offered a $1 billion loan guarantee in return to fire a prosecutor. Crime of bribery, that's it, over, already.
While all this is admissible in a court of law, more admissible than anything Schiff has presented so far, there's even stronger testimony to be found.
To verify Giuliani's claims, we needed to ask these witnesses ourselves whether the documents they presented to us were legitimate, to verify these documents came from Ukrainian officials. We would go to them, and by our side would be none other than Rudy Giuliani and his brimming briefcase containing hundreds of files pertaining to Biden money laundering and Democrat collusion. And if the State Department were truly keeping these witnesses from coming to the U.S. to testify, as the witnesses claim, all the more reason for us to find them. If Schiff would not let their voices be heard, One America would. Ground zero witness for Joe Biden's alleged crime of extortion and bribery? A man named Viktor Shokin.
Viktor Shokin is the prosecutor general Biden boasts about firing.
If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money.
This is bribery at the highest level of government. A vice president of the United States bribing the president of a country to force the president of the country to do what he doesn't want to do. And now Joe will tell us, oh, it wasn't corrupt because I didn't know about my son. I have 10 ways to prove to you he knew about his son, and only one thing would prove it to you: logic. Logic.
Giuliani says Shokin's testimony is Exhibit A, proving President Trump was duty-bound to ask Ukraine to look into Biden and Democrat criminality. I asked Giuliani about how each witness has been and will be attacked for their credibility.
You can question their credibility, but you can't question that there's evidence. So Mr. Shokin will testify in much more detail than this, but basically, Mr. Shokin is the prosecutor who was fired. Yes, this whole question, well, was he investigating Biden's son? He will testify that he was investigating Biden's son. He will show you the documents that prove he was investigating Biden's son. He will show you documents proving that Biden's son committed the crime of money laundering to the tune of $3 million. And he will testify to a number of incidents where President Poroshenko came into his office and told him to slow down on Burisma and Biden because Vice President Biden was objecting.
We tracked Shokin down and established a safe house, a secured compound to shield us from media and other security threats for a time. Shokin shared details you haven't heard anywhere else. Stay right here. We'll be right back.
Former Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin agreed to appear on camera after much negotiation. His mobility was limited. Shokin was undergoing treatment for mercury poisoning. A toxic level of mercury in the human body is 2.0. Medical reports from an Austrian hospital show Shokin's blood results came in at 9.7. He died twice and had to be resuscitated. It is the opinion of his medical doctors that this was not an accidentally consumed level of mercury. Still undergoing intensive treatment, Shokin could not leave the country on top of his visa problems. So Mayor Rudy Giuliani by our side, with his nearly 2 years of investigations into Ukraine, we packed everything up and flew to Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. This would be a significant trip, not only for us, but for Giuliani also. Democrats portrayed Giuliani as slinking about in Ukraine collecting dirt on Biden for 2020, when the reality was quite different.
Would it surprise you that I haven't been in Ukraine for 2 years? That during the course of this entire thing, I never went to the Ukraine, either in the daytime or in the middle of the night?
And Giuliani's research then was for his client, the president, to defend him against the Mueller investigation, not in preparation for 2020. Now, at the prospect of meeting Shokin and other witnesses face-to-face, the mayor decided to break his streak of Ukrainian absence. We landed in Kyiv, and America's mayor stepped foot in Ukraine for the first time in 2 years. We passed through the Kyiv airport with our camera equipment, the mayor's entourage, and a security detail, and we were taken in separate vehicles to an undisclosed compound secured just beyond the city. As I prepared to meet with Shokin, I refreshed my own understanding of this man. Shokin was appointed Prosecutor General in February 2015, succeeding a long line of short-lived prosecutors. Shokin lasted just over 1 year and resigned in spring of 2016. Mainstream media, in choir-like harmony with Joe Biden and other American-owned news outlets in Ukraine, chant repeatedly how Biden was justified in firing Shokin because he was inept and corrupt, even posting pictures of what appeared to be protesters against Shokin. Media cites so-called anti-corruption groups in Ukraine, groups that themselves have corruption charges against them. This is where Ukraine's tangled web of non-government organizations and dark money transmogrify into a self-licking ice cream cone. Group A says Group B is good, and Group B says Group A is good. Slap an upstanding-sounding anti-corruption title to it, and presto, a mutual protection racket is born. Bottom line is, few groups and individuals can be trusted out here. In Ukraine, verify everything and check it twice.
We have Mayor Rudy Giuliani, personal attorney to the president, and former prosecutor general of Ukraine, Viktor Shokin, here in Kiev, Ukraine, meeting for the very first time in person. And we have a lot of questions for Mr. Shokin. We'd love to ask them of you. So thank you for joining us at One American News. Take us back to your career as a prosecutor and how you got into that office and your time there. Take us back to the first time you were appointed to that office.
My first obligation was to reform the prosecutor's office, to fight corruption, not just within Ukraine, but within the office itself. We had a number of hot cases. One of them was Burisma. The first half a year, we were doing great, communicating, investigating, coordinating with allies. Shokin says even relations with then Ambassador Payet was off to a good start.
But at some point, something happened, something changed.
The problem began when we started to dig into Burisma.
Did Ambassador Payet confront you directly about Burisma?
Shokin says Ambassador Payet's pressure on him was indirect, but clear. They went from meeting multiple times a week to not at all. Payet even delivered a speech criticizing Shokin's handling of Burisma. For me, says Shokin, it was interesting why an ambassador of a foreign nation was trying to interfere in the investigation of a sovereign country. The Burisma investigation consisted of 3 charges: money laundering, tax evasion, and illegal enrichment for its founder, Mykola Zlochevsky. Shokin says pressure to stop investigating Hunter Biden's Burisma activities then increased, and President Poroshenko personally asked Shokin to wind down the Burisma investigation to appease then Vice President and Obama's Ukraine point man, Joe Biden. As the months passed, more cases and investigations into Burisma sprung up, and President Poroshenko came to Shokin's office and told Shokin the Burisma case was why Joe Biden wouldn't release $1 billion in U.S. loan guarantees, money Ukraine needed desperately. Yes, said Shokin, that's what he told me. He came to me and said, "You are a patriot of Ukraine. We need this $1 billion. We're at war, and if you are a patriot, you will close this case." My conversation with Poroshenko on this, Shokin says, was in a phone call. It was after we started seizing Burisma assets in Ukraine when Poroshenko called me and said, "Listen, this all has to stop already. Joe Biden's temper is overflowing. This seizing of Burisma assets," said Poroshenko, was the last straw. Shokin says Poroshenko then paid him a visit in his office, asking for Shokin's resignation. Shokin responded and asked, "Why do I have to go? I haven't done anything wrong. I'm doing my job. This is standard procedure. We have reason to freeze Burisma assets." And Poroshenko said, "Biden is angry about you freezing Burisma assets. I'll figure something out." We asked Shokin if this demand for a resignation was specifically because Biden had asked for it, or if there were other possible reasons. Shokin insists it was all Biden. Because of Biden, says Shokin. Everyone knew what was going on. Poroshenko told me directly that I had to step down as prosecutor general because of Joe Biden. Biden and leftist media claim Shokin was corrupt and inept and had to be dismissed, despite the fact that not a single charge of corruption has ever been raised or proven against Shokin to date. To this, Shokin shrugs. Shokin says people don't have to believe him. Just look at the transcripts. Biden's transcripts, that is. The transcripts of Biden's telephone conversations with Poroshenko, says Shokin, is where the truth will show itself. Americans must demand it. And if they do, they will see, broad as day, Joe Biden was illegally influencing foreign officials in order to protect his son, Hunter, and shield illegal money laundering activities.
Be very interesting to see the transcripts. We've got numerous phone calls from the vice president to Poroshenko. Poroshenko showing up in Shokin's office and saying, Biden's putting pressure on me. You can't go forward with Burisma. Can you slow it down? And all of a sudden, Shokin gets this communique from Latvia that shows a $16 million laundering transaction, classic laundering transaction. It goes from Ukraine to Latvia. It's disguised as a loan to another company, WireLogic, I believe. It then goes to Cyprus, gets disguised as another loan. This is called Digitech. And then it's dispersed as payment of board fees. Now, you don't make two loans to pay board fees unless you're laundering the money. $3 million gets to Hunter Biden that way. That is a straight-out violation of a money laundering statute.
The document referred here is an official letter dated February 2016 from the Prosecutor's Office of the Republic of Latvia, Money Laundering Investigations Division. The letter states, quote, according to publicly available information, Burisma Holding Limited and its director Hunter Biden are involved in a corruption affair, end quote. Latvia traced $14.7 million between 2012 and 2015. The funds were transferred back to Burisma to the accounts of Devon Archer and Hunter Biden. When America asked Shokin if he recognized the document, he said he did, and that there were more such inquiries that made it impossible for him to justify simply shutting down the Burisma cases. One American News also verified on camera what Shokin had stated in a stunning 12-page sworn affidavit to an Austrian court. Quote, President Poroshenko asked me to resign due to pressure from the U.S. presidential administration, in particular from Joe Biden, who was the U.S. vice president. Biden was threatening to withhold $1 billion in U.S. subsidies to Ukraine until I was removed from office. Shokin goes on, quote, I was forced out because I was leading a wide-ranging corruption probe into Burisma. Joe Biden's son was on the board of directors. I refused to close this investigation. Therefore, I was forced to leave under direct and intense pressure from Joe Biden and the U.S. administration.
Remember, Mr. Shokin, we don't just have to rely on you. Mr. Biden confessed to this. Mr. Biden stood up, I think it was on January 23, 2018, in front of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he said, I told Poroshenko that he had 6 hours to fire that son of a, that's you, or he's not going to get his $1 billion. So in America, we call that a confession.
Of course, if this case were tried in a European Court of Human Rights, this would be an open-shut case. Joe Biden broke Ukrainian law. Article 343 of the Ukrainian Criminal Code covers intervention in the activities of law enforcement officers using coercion, blackmail, threats, and intervention against prosecutors.
Let's go back to the question that Chanel asked before, which is, so you're a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, there's a universal definition of bribery. The universal definition of bribery is that it's a crime to offer something of value in return for official action.
Yes.
As a lawyer, is it clear to you that's what happened here with Biden?
Of course. I also have an expert legal opinion from Ukrainian parliament stating what Biden did in Ukraine was internal interference in the Ukrainian political system, which is a crime. This testimony directly contradicts proclamations that Biden's committed no wrong.
He did not do a single thing wrong, as everybody's investigated.
Right. Well, he's making up the allegations against the vice president.
Clearly, someone is lying. It seems releasing a transcript of these phone calls between Biden and Poroshenko around the time Shokin was dismissed should clarify much.
So Senator Lindsey Graham has subpoenaed a number of telephone calls and records that basically show that this campaign to get rid of Shokin goes back to at least December 7, 2015. There's a phone call on the logs of the State Department that says the vice president calls Poroshenko, and according to the leak, so I can't be sure, it says to dismiss Shokin. So this is one of the FOIA requests that was made by John Solomon that the Justice Department, the State Department is resisting. But now Senator Graham has subpoenaed it and said to Mike Pompeo, why are you holding this up? I mean, if it doesn't say it, we should know it. But there's definitely a phone call between Biden and Poroshenko on December 7th. 2 days later, Biden's son and his partner, Devin Archer, later convicted of insider trading, meet at the State Department concerning Burisma.
That meeting was with a man named Tony Blinken, the number 2 at the State Department. Only transcripts and real whistleblowers will be able to shed light on what all this was about. Next, we found the man who replaced Shokin as Prosecutor General, a controversial figure reported to have been handpicked by Biden himself. But even so, the case on Burisma only gets worse. Don't go anywhere. You're watching an exclusive One American News Investigates. We'll be right back. Following the resignation of Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin in 2016, the country was in need of a new Prosecutor General. It was around this time, Giuliani informs us, that Biden was calling President Poroshenko again. The transcripts of these phone conversations, Giuliani says, will also be very revealing as to whether Biden had a hand in choosing Shokin's replacement.
Following the resignation of Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin in 2016, the country was in need of a new Prosecutor General. It was around this time, Giuliani informs us, that Biden was calling President Poroshenko again. The transcripts of these phone conversations, Giuliani says, will also be very revealing as to whether Biden had a hand in choosing Shokin's replacement. 2 months after Shokin left his post, a new Prosecutor General was appointed. Yuri Lutsenko, an engineer by training who had gained patriotic notoriety for being thrown in prison for 2 years for his outspoken criticism of Russia. Lutsenko fought on the Eastern Front with his wife and sons, beating back Russian tanks in defense of Ukrainian sovereignty. A hero in certain Ukrainian circles, Lutsenko inherits the highest legal office in the land. One problem: Lutsenko has 0 legal training. To this appointment, Joe Biden expressed approval.
Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
Lutsenko was least willing to talk to us initially, but we needed to get him on record. He was willing to meet with us. We made our way to a secured lodge in the woods beyond the Capitol, surrounded by security. Remember, Rudy Giuliani has been conducting these interviews and has been collecting these documents since November 2018. This will be the first time he will have met many of these witnesses face to face. I discussed with Giuliani first what he expected out of our next witness. Lutsenko said Giuliani would be able to demonstrate a clear line between our U.S. Embassy and interference in the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office. Interference that came by way of forcing them to open or close certain cases, like, say, Burisma. That our U.S. Embassy in Kiev was so influential in Ukraine's internal affairs raises even more alarms if it is shown that the embassy was clearly rooting for one candidate of one political party in a presidential election. Lutsenko had recently stirred up delight amongst the left for seemingly having turned on Giuliani. Lutsenko has a mixed reputation. He at first seemed to back up everything that Giuliani was arguing about Biden money laundering activity through Burisma. Then, Lutsenko seemed to have suddenly changed course and said he didn't think the Bidens committed a crime. Lutsenko clarified. The media had chopped his statement in half, he says. His full statement back then was that he didn't think the Bidens committed a crime in Ukraine. but that they likely committed a crime in the US.
I gave 16 interviews to American serious newspapers and TV, and only one.
Out of how many? One out of how many?
One from 16.
One out of?
One newspaper, only one, from 16 media, printed my answer, my full answer.
That crime, his office found, was money laundering at a massive scale.
So, Mr. Lutsenko, you inherited Mr. Shokin's Prosecutor General office, and describe for us your first interaction with the U.S. Embassy in this position.
So everything was good, but then Yovanovitch visited me.
Ambassador Yovanovitch.
Ambassador Yovanovitch and Mr. Kent, they visited me for small negotiation or talkings.
Did they visit you in your office? Just curious.
Yes. Firstly, I visited her in her office, and then it was the second meeting, but the first in my office. They visited me. And we spoke normally, and she asked me to change some old deputies.
Ambassador Yovanovitch asked you?
Not asked, but maybe she advised me to change your deputies, because they are from old team and they are not very effective.
For context, Ambassador Yovanovitch was brought before America by Adam Schiff and used in the impeachment inquiry as one of his star witnesses, and with a classical Schiff indignance, introduced as
Ambassador Yovanovitch was an anti-corruption champion.
Schiff painted Yovanovitch the poor, heroic woman whose reputation as a lifelong civil servant was maligned by the likes of Rudy Giuliani and the Trump administration, who, in Adam Schiff's script, were villains milling around in Ukraine to dig up dirt on their equally innocent Joe Biden. For Schiff, Yovanovitch's testimony would prove how President Trump sent people on the ground to spread conspiracy theories and smear campaigns against upstanding citizens like Yovanovitch in order to cheat America out of the next election. But Yovanovitch's reputation is not all Schiff makes it out to be. Multiple Ukrainian sources said that Yovanovitch's embassy was colloquially dubbed the Clinton campaign headquarters, with many even receiving invites to a big Hillary Clinton victory party planned at Yovanovitch's house. Lutsenko says the ambassador was doing the Democrat Party's bidding nearly from the day he started in the prosecutor's office, and he realized this on her second visit with George Kent sitting beside her.
She asked me to close it, but I said, it is impossible, we have investigation process, and Mr. Investigator. So I took a piece of paper on my table, and I write these three, not cases, but enemies: Kaczko, Leshchenko, Shabunin. Okay, Miss Ambassador, Madam Ambassador, let's continue your untouchable list. She asked me, why are you so serious? And then I destroyed this list. So while I am general prosecutor, no president, no ambassador could give me or could announce me such lists. That was the full story.
Incidentally, this list of so-called untouchables were of names involved in an agency called NABU, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. This will later prove to be a bombshell detail.
She ran immediately from the office, and my boy near office doors asked me, what you told her? His red face and very angry. I didn't agree to receive any orders to open or to close criminal cases.
Fast forward to Adam Schiff's impeachment inquiry, and Schiff called up Ambassador Yovanovitch to testify. Lutsenko says he was shocked to watch Yovanovitch's testimony when she said she never gave him such a list.
The allegation that I disseminated a do not prosecute list was a fabrication. Mr. Lutsenko, the former Ukrainian prosecutor general who made that allegation, has acknowledged that the list never existed.
Technically, says Lutsenko, no, she never gave him a list. The list still came from her.
And our interpreter made a small mistake. He said, in Ukraine, вона озвучила she announced me surnames, but my interpreter said he, as far as I remember, gave me a list. So announced and to give, certainly it is the difference. And Yovanovitch and Kent now used this mistake of interpreter to speak that there was no such story. Yes, there was no list, but there was announced of 3 surnames.
This little episode merely demonstrates that Schiff's star witness is perhaps not as truthful as he would need us to believe. But worse, that she was actively, personally involved in investigations at the Prosecutor General's office. An unusual and unethical scenario, to say the least. But following Lutsenko's side of the story, it gets worse. When Lutsenko found a case in which $7 billion went to the U.S. via possible money laundering to a firm called Franklin Templeton, he wanted help from the Justice Department to track down and retrieve this money. Considering how interested Yovanovitch was in the status of certain cases at the Prosecutor General's office, Lutsenko thought Yovanovitch would be helpful. She wasn't. In fact, she played the bureaucratic dunce.
I was once again shocked when Madame Yovanovitch told to members of the committee that Lutsenko asked me to organize his meeting with American Attorney General. But you know, gentlemen, that there is a procedure for this, she told. The procedure that Lutsenko should, or even must give us, and short topic, what points he wants to discuss with American law enforcement bodies. And Yovanovitch said, and he never gave us such an information. I have bad news for Madame Yovanovitch. This is my letter, my deputy letter, to request for cooperation in investigation against the criminal organization of Yanukovych and regarding possible investments in the US-based mutual and other funds for the purpose of money laundering. Dear Legal Attaché, Office of the Legal Attaché, US Embassy.
When is this dated?
The October of 2017. The October of 2017. Here is stamps, signature, everything.
And she claimed before Congress that she never received a copy.
Under oath, she declared in the Congress that I never sent any information. This is official letter.
Here, we accomplished a major task in our investigation. We verified that this incriminating official letter from the prosecutor's office was authentic and came from Lutsenko's office. And Lutsenko confirms incontrovertible authenticity, but proves also Yovanovitch's deceit.
And Yovanovitch blocked me. She never answered me after this request, and she lied in Congress. This is the evidence. I am happy that I have this document, because how I could explain to American public that I am right? This is this document, with signature, with stamps, with everything.
It all made sense, says Lutsenko, when he realized that Adam Schiff himself invested in Franklin Templeton. Once again, it is fair to continue to question the credibility of each of these witnesses, but stripped down to the dates and the facts, a jury can ostensibly ignore Lutsenko and look upon this letter of record to Yovanovitch's embassy alone to prove that one of Adam Schiff's star witnesses, Marie Yovanovitch, lied before Congress in America. She seems to have been trying to help protect a system of greed and enrichment enjoyed by top state and Democrat Party officials. Next, we go back to Kiev, where we uncover a devastating pile of smoking guns. We'll be right back. So beyond the word of Viktor Shokin, the prosecutor general who has reason enough to begrudge Joe Biden for having him fired, we just heard testimony from Shokin's successor, another equally controversial but compelling witness, Mr. Lutsenko. Lutsenko and Shokin, two of Ukraine's prosecutors general, serve as first-hand witnesses and provided documentary evidence showing what appears to have been a concerted effort between the U.S. State Department, the vice president, and the Ukrainian government to meddle in Ukrainian criminal cases. We also found that Biden likely violated Section 343 of the Ukrainian Criminal Code in his interfering role in pressuring Ukraine to have Viktor Shokin removed from office.
Earlier, Giuliani reminded us this mess started off with his looking into Democrat collusion and election interference back in the Mueller days. But in the process, the Biden's names came up over and again, long before Biden announced his presidential dreams. Evidence persistently cropped up showing how Joe Biden was pulling strings in the Ukrainian prosecutor's office while it was investigating his own son's company. And the U.S. Embassy was telling the prosecutor which cases and deputies to dismiss. The story gets worse. Opportunity means motive, the three indicators justifying an investigation into a crime. For Biden, the opportunity was Obama making him point man for Ukraine. The means was the power of the vice presidency to wield $1 billion in U.S. aid to get Ukrainians to do whatever Biden wanted, a power he exercised by his own admission. The motive was to protect his son Hunter from investigation. Enter Andrei Derkach. 7 times elected to the Ukrainian parliament, Derkach sits on the budget committee and has become renowned in Ukraine for his dogged opposition to an agency called NABU, the Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. NABU's court system has investigatory powers that some argue wrongfully overrides the Ukrainian prosecutor general's office. NABU's structure was written by none other than Yovanovitch's sidekick, George Kent, another Adam Schiff witness from America's compromised State Department. This was Derkach and Giuliani's first meeting face-to-face. Giuliani first heard of Derkach in October 2019. Derkach gave a press conference laying out information gathered from investigative journalists and government files that confirmed Burisma's money laundering, Hunter and Joe Biden's direct involvement, and interference in the 2016 elections. This press conference was quickly ignored and buried by most of the press. Derkach put all his findings on a website called NABU Leaks. But because Derkach was an active member of Ukrainian parliament, before we began, Giuliani wanted to make clear his role in speaking to Derkach.
This interview is being conducted by OAN, an American network, journalistic organization that's dedicated to bringing out the truth. And my role, you should understand, I don't represent the government. I am President Trump's private attorney. So my role throughout, going back over a year before I met you, I wish I'd met you earlier, is to try to get the facts about Ukrainian collusion, Ukrainian corruption that interfered in the 2016 election, because the Democrats spent so much time falsely accusing the president of participating with Russians. That turned out to be false. I believe it was false and manufactured. And my goal here is just one simple goal, and that is to defend the President of the United States individually against the original false charges of Russian collusion and now the false charges with regard to his conversation with President Zelensky, which was not only an appropriate conversation, but I hope that we're going to be able to show it was a required conversation.
To this, Derkach also established his motive for producing the evidence showing corruption in the 2016 elections and the Biden's money laundering activity. Derkach said the evidence he had proving the Bidens were stealing from Ukrainian taxpayers, U.S. taxpayers, and committing crimes to cover up their tracks could fill volumes stacked to the ceiling. And what was Derkach's motive? To recover stolen Ukrainian tax dollars to the Ukrainian treasury. and restore U.S.-Ukrainian trust.
For the time that we had, Mr. Derkach offered us a hefty folder. The evidence within, he said, clearly demonstrated how the embassy, the State Department, and Joe Biden were all trying to cover up one thing: money laundering on a massive scale. We'll be right back.
Derkach started a website called NABUleaks.com. There he compiled the documents and evidence that have been leaked to him by groups of Ukrainian investigative journalists who, fearing for their lives, were unwilling to publish under their own names in a country known to dispense poisoning, beheadings, and assassins. We start by following the money. What Derkach presented us was astounding. New evidence. A year and a half worth of Morgan Stanley bank statements mapping out the cash flow of Devon Archer's Rosemont Seneca company. Archer was Hunter Biden's business partner and fellow Burisma board member. Rosemont Seneca was the shell company at the heart of an enormous money laundering operation, says Derkach. Over 300 pages of bank statements were given to One American News and to Mr. Giuliani for review. Derkach notes, in this time period, large payments were made to Robert Hunter Biden, or just Robert Biden. The reasons for these large payments were unclear. Combine these bank statements with the Latvian government investigation, and the Prosecutor General's office, just 4 weeks before our sit-down with Derkach, issued an official indictment against Burisma founder Nikolai Zlochevsky. In a November 2019 press conference, it was announced that the Prosecutor General's office found, quote, the son of Vice President Joe Biden receiving payment for his services with money raised through criminal means and money laundering. Money coming not from successful company operations, but from money stolen from Ukraine. Money to Burisma board members for no stated reason to the tune of $16.5 million. This was the case opened under Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin's watch, the case over which he was allegedly dismissed. This is where George Kent's increasingly nefarious-seeming Anti-Corruption Bureau gets involved again. Let's go back to when Shokin received what must have been parts, if not all, of these bank statements and the request from Latvia. For brevity, here is a very simplified summation of what happened next. Shokin writes a letter. Dear Mr. Sitnik, head of the Anti-Corruption Bureau, please conduct a trial on the Burisma case. Mr. Sitnik responds, Dear Mr. Shokin, having reviewed your request, we do not know what you are talking about. Please jump through these bureaucratic hoops. Shokin responds, Mr. Sitnik, we don't have time. The statute of limitations is about to expire. Please help. Derkach then shows us how immediately after Shokin sends these requests to NABU, the first deputy of NABU has his assistant leak Shokin's Burisma requests to the U.S. Embassy. Polina Sig sends this email, among others, to State Department employee Hanna Yemelyanova. Unusual, right? It gets even more curious. Instead of investigating Burisma, as Shokin asked, the Anti-Corruption Bureau starts quietly investigating Viktor Shokin and Shokin's family. Derkach showed us leaked transmissions of very private information, full dossiers on Shokin and his family that were sent from the Anti-Corruption Bureau to the U.S. Embassy. The timing of this, you ask? 2 weeks before Joe Biden visits Kiev with the possibility of America's $1 billion in loan guarantees. 8 weeks later, Shokin is asked to resign.
This is what we know. There are many more documents that seem to back up and add to this story. Currently, OAN is sorting through hundreds of text messages allegedly sent between Anti-Corruption Bureau officials and the U.S. Embassy regarding Burisma. Too much to cram into a single segment on TV. Intriguing questions arise as we pore over these leaked emails and documents and sequences of events. NABU's stated mission is to combat corruption. The reality, says Derkach, is that it serves as a shelter to hide and protect corruption.
Who controls NABU?
The U.S. Embassy.
The U.S. Embassy controls your law enforcement bureau?
It's all in the documents.
And their results on corruption have been, I was told by one witness, pretty close to zero.
Yes. Remember, it was members of NABU that Ambassador Yovanovitch allegedly put on a do not prosecute list, according to Prosecutor General Yuri Lutsenko.
And the ambassador at the time was Ambassador Yovanovitch, who testified recently that she was very, very strongly anti-corruption.
When talking about corruption or anti-corruption, you have to talk about results, says Derkash. When Ambassador Yovanovitch sat in Congress and was referred to as a champion of anti-corruption, half of Ukraine was laughing. Corruption got worse under Yovanovitch in the Poroshenko presidency. Much worse, and even more money was stolen from our treasury. Yovanovitch's embassy and its close connection with NABU is also revelatory, says Derkash.
So NABU, which was established by George Kent and the Soros Organization to fight corruption, turns out to be corrupt itself. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, Derkash says. NABU was trying to make money.
And many people know that, right? Many Ukrainians have told me that.
In politics, everybody knows this. NABU is dirty. Derkash doesn't just say this. We sat with him for over 3 hours, learning about the cases that were closed or opened at the will of the U.S. Embassy, looking at case rulings that found billions of U.S. dollars were being siphoned off into an endless series of NGOs tightly controlled by the U.S. Embassy. We asked about Burisma.
So you found 6 criminal cases, proceedings related to Burisma, and immediately when you announced that you were looking into these 6 cases, you are saying that 2 of them were closed?
More than 2. 11 total cases related to Burisma have now been closed. We just got a new prosecutor general. On the second day of his job, he closed one of the Burisma cases immediately.
Joe Biden and Hunter Biden pop up. Tell us how their names are involved in these criminal cases you were looking into. How is Joe Biden and Hunter Biden's name involved?
Derkash goes at length talking about the political context in which Burisma was operating, evading taxes and giving away illegal licenses to certain individuals. At the end of it, Ukrainian tax dollars were stolen and money laundered through Burisma. Prosecutors presented before Ukrainian parliament an official indictment showing a clear trail of money laundering going through Burisma and to Hunter Biden. Derkash also mentions how it has been leaked from the prosecutor's office that an open case currently is looking into $900,000 found paid to Joe Biden from Ukraine for, quote, consulting services. But the case is reportedly still ongoing, and we don't yet have access to this document. Just days after the Burisma announcement, the prosecutor was fired. Clearly, Burisma is still being protected. Derkash had much to show, yet in speaking, he was notably careful to ensure that everything he said he backed up with evidence. But by interview's end, we realized this story was far from over. The documents we have shown you are but a small fraction of what was given to us, but they seem to add explosive context to a devastating portrait of power, greed, cover-ups, and political arrogance. Derkash says he has sent countless official requests for help from the United States. His efforts were met with radio silence. Until now. Stay here. We'll be right back. Democrat impeachment, led by failed and frustrated screenwriter turned Hollywood congressman Adam Schiff, has turned into a full-blown and public investigation of an international scandal involving not Donald J. Trump, but the Bidens, the Democratic Party, and our U.S. State Department. OAN has led the charge in this with Rudy Giuliani, and we will continue to do so. In the meantime, it is notable, Shokin, Lutsenko, Derkach, these men are turning out to be actual whistleblowers. A jury can scrutinize their reputations and question their first-hand testimonies, but ultimately, the official documents they present speak for themselves.
And as whistleblowers, these men, along with our previous 3 witnesses, possess the courage to show their faces, show their names, to come out of the shadows to testify under oath, and to do so again before a fair hearing, if only their visas would allow it. These men are risking their lives, livelihoods, and their families to come forward and whistleblow on corruption and money laundering stolen from their homeland's coffers. This is their stated motive for coming forward. They are asking for America's help, for our justice system to cooperate in joint Ukraine investigations to recover their stolen money. Giuliani says he hopes these findings will inspire action. But first, it requires digging up the evidence, as we have done, and getting these whistleblowers' voices and testimonies heard.
First of all, I have to say that Chanel has performed a real public service in getting this information out. Something like this should have been done by our FBI 2 years ago, or our Justice Department. And as someone who served 17 years in the Justice Department, I'm embarrassed that it hasn't been. And I'm embarrassed that you had to deal with a Justice Department that turned your people away because they wouldn't hear equal wrongdoing by Democrats, that they were more than anxious not only to hear about Republicans, but in some cases to create and elaborate. So I thank you for allowing this forum.
Each of our 6 witnesses brought with them evidence admissible in a court of law. Their powerful testimonies shed light on a side of the story Adam Schiff's one-sided impeachment not only omitted, but the media has concealed, covered up, ignored, or wrongfully discredited, discrediting the truth in order to manufacture an impeachment hoax that amounts to a coup. History will note their complicity. Some will call it treason. Worse than media's complicity is the state of our own law enforcement. Where is our FBI in all of this?
After 2016, the FBI had a choice: go after DNC corruption or target innocent people to indulge the FBI's personal hatred for President Trump. On the outside, it appears the FBI has chosen the latter. Chalupa, the Bidens, Devon Archer, the DNC, and others have left not breadcrumbs leading to bribery, money laundering, and collusion, but floodlights blasting a sheer disregard for the law and for the witnesses prepared to testify. Who will act?
And what about our State Department? If investigations are opened, will our State Department hand over the transcripts between Joe Biden and Poroshenko? Will the State Department cooperate with an investigation into the actions of their employees in Ukraine?
Our State Department should start operating for us and not to protect some of the people in there who may have done something wrong. For you to do this, I know takes a lot of courage.
Courage coming from real whistleblowers. Whistleblowers not huddling in Adam Schiff's basement or behind vainglorious attorneys. No, the real whistleblowers are the Ukrainian whistleblowers blowing the whistle on real crimes that likely took place on Ukrainian and American soil in an astounding political scandal. Not only do their evidence and testimony justify President Trump in asking Ukraine about corruption, these crimes remind us it is the president's duty to ensure that our political offices are never used to bribe, corrupt, or steal from foreign nations, regardless of whether a drug addict son is at risk of being exposed for his greed.
We are all out of time for part 3, but stay tuned. OAN is currently poring over the rest of this material offered to us by Derkach and others. And Giuliani is, as of this broadcast, compiling and presenting his own report to the president and to Congress based on what we have found. OAN will await the White House's review of these exhibits before making public the rest of these findings. Since launching this exclusive OAN Investigates series, the dam is breaking. More witnesses are coming forward willing to testify, present documents, and swear under oath about DNC corruption, Biden money laundering, and State Department collusion. They want to testify, and if Adam Schiff or our State Department won't let them, then to testify straight to the American people through our cameras. This OAN investigation does not end here. It's only just beginning, and justice will be served. I'm Chanel Rion in Washington. Thank you for watching.
While we are sitting here in the middle of these impeachment proceedings, have hit an all-time high. A recent poll shows that the American people are the happiest they've been with the direction of the country in 15 years. Whether it's the economy, security, military preparedness, safer streets, or safer neighborhoods, they're all way up. We, the American people, are happier. And yet, the House managers tell you that the president needs to be removed because he's an immediate threat to our country. Listen to the words that they just said. We the American people, cannot decide who should be our president because, as they tell us, and these are their words, quote, we cannot be assured that the vote will be fairly won. Do you really, really believe that? Do you really think so little of the American people? We don't. We trust the American people to decide who should be our president. Candidly, it's crazy to think otherwise. So what's really going on? What's really going on is that he's a threat to them, and he's an immediate, legitimate threat to them, and he's an immediate, legitimate threat to their candidates because the election is only 8 months away. Let's talk about some of the things the president has done. We've replaced NAFTA with the historic MCA. We've killed the terrorists al-Baghdadi and Soleimani. We secured $738 billion to rebuild the military. There are more than 7 million jobs created since the election.